Good evening. The school committee workshop business session of August 26, 2024 will now come to order. This meeting is being recorded and will be made available for viewing on the Methuen Public Schools website. Madam Secretary, will you please call the roll?
Ryan DiZoglio. Mary Beth Donovan.
Here.
Egan.
Here.
Kristen Maxwell.
Here.
Dan Shabilia.
Here.
Kenneth Willett.
Here.
Mayor Neil Perry.
Here, thank you. May I have a motion and a second to amend the agenda to remove item 4, ratification of custodial contract?
So moved.
Second.
Moved by member Shabilia, seconded by the vice chair. Any discussion? Did you just want to say, yeah?
Sure.
Yeah.
Sorry. Sure. We just don't have the final confirmation between parties for the MOU I shared with you. So the language has been ratified, but the actual document, we did not get that back today from their representative. So I apologize for that, but we're not going to do it unless we have it clear.
No problem. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Thank you. The ayes carry unanimously on that. May I have a motion and a second to accept the agenda as amended?
So moved. Second.
A motion by member Shabilia, seconded by member Willett. Any discussion? Hearing and seeing none. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Thank you. Carries unanimously. Let's move on to the flag salute. Can't wait for school to be back in, so we have students come and do this. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Has anyone signed up for public participation? I'm assuming no. Okay, so we have one email that I will read that came in today. This is from Lauren Jalbert, who lives at 6 Lady Slipper Lane. As a former student of the Timony, I'm writing about the bullying my friends and I experienced, as well as the general lack of decorum by students and admin alike at that school. Students in every grade constantly made degrading, racial, or homophobic remarks to others. Teachers didn't do anything, only temporarily separating students or student groups that seemed to have conflict. When it was reported to guidance, nothing was done. Ms. Durkee would oversee a recess to ensure no physical altercation happened and would keep us separate so as not to have verbal interactions, but only for recess. None of this addresses the problem of the bullying. None of this alleviates the stresses of the bullied students. I would have liked to have seen more adult involvement towards conflict resolution in these ongoing cases of bullying. The schools should have informed the parents what was going on in their child's day beyond education, especially when it affected their learning environment. There needs to be something in place other than punishing both groups for months on end. When a friend addressed to administrators with parents in the email, the immediate solution was to separate the students who were striving for resolution into a meeting with administration alone. The only thing they did was separate the groups. There was no other attempt to stop, pause, or work towards resolution in any way. Unfortunately, the issue went beyond lunch and recess, so that minimal separation was futile at best. My hope in writing this email is to see better understanding and involvement with the staff, guidance, and administrators at the Timony towards the students who actively seek their help. It was unfortunate for my group of friends that it took an email from a student to a joint admin and parents group to get a minimal involvement from the administrators. For the students that don't have parental involvement, it seems like there's no help at all at the Timony. Thank you for your time. Lauren Jalbert. And just a reminder that if you cannot make the meeting in person for public participation, you can send an email to Martha Sorois at masorois@methuen.k12.ma.us before 3 p.m. on the day of the school committee meeting. Madam Superintendent, would you please start the discussion on the transportation for the start of school?
Sure thing. So we have invited Rich Labrie. He is our consultant that did the report last meeting that we shared with you. He didn't come last week to meet with the Transportation Subcommittee. I think there's an update that we want to present tonight to the committee. This is something we are going to follow closely about our routes and open drivers, so we have some of that to share with you tonight. And then, our next steps, right, what we should be doing next in this process. So I will invite Rich Labrie up to the podium.
Good evening,
Evening.
and thank you for the invitation. As the superintendent mentioned, I met with the Transportation Subcommittee last week, reported where we were at that point with drivers for the start of the school year. We were about the equivalent of 6 drivers short on the regular transportation side and 2 drivers short on the special ed side. Between then and now, we learned this afternoon that the special ed routes are all fully covered, and they have sufficient drivers, and they are the equivalent of 1 driver short on the regular transportation side, but they have a driver in training who's being tested tomorrow. So hopefully that driver passes and this number of drivers is complete. However, there are 4 parts of 4 routes, mostly in the afternoon, that remain uncovered. But in their email to me, they indicated that they still had 4 spare drivers at the terminal. I sent them back an email this afternoon indicating that I expect any and all Beacon personnel to be driving to cover these open routes. And these are primarily in the afternoon, and they're at Timony and Tenney. We're monitoring this more than on a daily basis. I mean, almost hourly as emails come back and forth. And I will say that the 2 transportation managers did work over the weekend because I did have some emails going back and forth with them over the weekend. So I give them at least that credit that they're working to resolve this issue. And as I said to the superintendent, at this point, we should wait and see for the start of school. If they have not covered everything, then I would think we will meet and discuss what our options are at that point with regard to the contract, non-performance, and/or default. As an aside, as a result of my meeting with both the subcommittee and questions that have come in, we are writing an addendum to the report to answer questions that have arisen. So,
If I may. You had mentioned that special ed bus routes are covered. We're 1 driver down on the other side, the bus side. But you said there are 4 routes in the afternoon that are uncovered. I assume that it's 1 driver per route, so my math is not mathing.
oh, no, the route, it's a run for your, either your upper or your lower programs. It's not a complete route, in other words, morning and afternoon. It's just a tier of the route that's uncovered.
Okay, so
And it would
in our
primarily be your
afternoon,
elementary schools.
in the afternoon, when kids need to get home, there are 4 buses. They may be from different upper, lower, so it may be 2 and 2, or it could be 3 and 1. I don't know. But either way, it's not 1 driver. Can't be one driver if there's 4 routes.
No. It's, they're missing driver time. They have drivers for the other 3 portions of the route. They're missing a driver for a portion of that route.
You follow?
What-
I'm not following this at all.
Okay,
You need a body in a bus to drive it. Simple as fact. Let's get that on the
Correct.
table.
All right.
If there's no body in the bus to drive it, that means they don't have drivers. That means buses don't leave. And if we have 4 buses that can't leave, that tells me we lack drivers.
No.
More than one.
The driver in question is completing the high school run, your middle school run, but your elementary run is uncovered at this point.
So we're missing a driver.
We're missing a part-time of a driver. But in essence, you don't have a full-time driver for that route. You're correct in that, looking at it that way. But given that this is probably between a 30 and a 40-minute run, they have the capability of covering that with either a mechanic who has a CDL license and/or office staff who have a CDL license, if they don't have enough spares. They've indicated in other school districts that they have office staff that will drive in an emergency situation. I would consider this to be an emergency situation if they don't have driver coverage for all of your routes.
And so how is it 4 routes? I'm sorry, I'd like to think I'm relatively intelligent, but apparently I can't justify how we have 4 routes and it's only one driver, one half-time driver down.
The driver that's down there are no routes covered on that run. In other words, I'll just say it's bus 19.
Yeah, we're looking for a full-time driver still on one route.
Okay,
So we have one route, meaning all tiers
Okay.
uncovered.
Uncovered.
That's a different kind of problem.
Yep,
Then we have 4 routes.
so that's 3. That one driver on all routes, high school, upper, lower, that's 3 routes right there.
Morning and afternoon.
So 6, okay.
Right? So that's uncovered right now, one full-time person to do all of those, the same bus, all 3 tiers.
Yep.
Okay, so we have 4 routes right now where we have, I'm gonna try to do this, because I know what you're asking, and I know it doesn't make, what you're saying is correct. We're going to have we're gonna have 4 late buses on Wednesday, if something doesn't change between now and Wednesday morning, right? But that doesn't mean all 6 routes are not covered, because I have somebody doing the morning route, the 3 morning routes and 2 PM routes. There's one left uncovered that they can't stay, their day cannot extend to the lower school hour, right? So it's not a full-time driver I'm looking for. I have these openings, which the hope is that the company, which through our interactions today, will cover those until they have somebody who can extend that time to cover that full-time. So yes, I know what you're asking, because we don't have a driver. Those 4 routes at the end of the day won't be covered, but it's not all 6 routes. I'm not looking for 4 full-time drivers. I know that's weird, and I'm with you on it still means kids are going to be waiting, and this is why we're pushing the fact that they need to either have other staff cover them, which, as Rich has said, has already been public knowledge that they've said from other districts is what they're going to do. So we're hoping they're going to do that with us.
So it's we have a driver that'll do all morning and then high school and upper, but not the lower. So it's 1 route at the end of the day, not
Right.
4 of those people.
I have 4 openings in different places for that situation we just said.
And
Yeah.
what is the barrier for them extending those days?
I do not know that.
Because what the barrier is to extending those days, because some of the feedback we've gotten, and I wish Member DeZaglio was here because I know he's received it as well, is that NRT is capping them on hours, saying you can't exceed 30 for no other reason than they don't want to pay it.
I don't know. I have not heard that. Have you heard that?
Your contract doesn't have a limitation in it.
I understand that. However, that doesn't mean they're not doing it on their end.
And we would never hear from the driver
We would
why.
never hear it, right,
Yeah,
but-
I mean,
I've received messages, I know he has mentioned he has as well, So I want to make sure that we're not,
We can certainly inquire. 'Cause
Yes.
we're going back and forth, as Rich said, like, we're all on these emails now since Friday to see where we are and what our progress is to fill in those routes.
I will say that communication has certainly improved a lot from the problems that we had last year. We may not like the message, but at least we have pretty frequent and open communication now with the two managers.
silver lining.
And I think they understand the importance of a good start.
I am aware that there are several drivers that they had that used to be full-time, they used to do morning and afternoon, who have decided for personal reasons or whatnot that they only want to drive in the morning. Some are taking care of elderly people or family members or whatever in the afternoon. So they don't want to get rid of them completely, because then they're down additional. So they have more drivers in the morning available than they do in the afternoon. So they're trying to find people to either pick up the second half or, find the match to that. So the fact that there's openings means that they probably borrowed somebody from the tech route, who they do their tech route and then they come and do our upper school route. But that still leaves the lower school route available.
And
So
the-
there's a lot of moving parts.
And the reason I responded to their email of the expectation of any and all Beacon personnel is that they have the ability to, because they're the parent company, they have the ability to transfer personnel between different sites that they operate in the Merrimack Valley. So,
All of those personnel aren't necessarily background checked and stuffed the way that our folks are. Accurate?
I'm sorry?
Is it accurate to say that not all of those floating personnel coming in from other districts are background checked and vetted the same way that our drivers are, that are regular, everyday drivers?
They would be checked based,
They
It-
would be, but the difference is that they're not checked. I check all of the ones and okay them from Methuen. So the issue there that we have to contend with as we go into this cycle of, new contract writing is that if they're coming from somewhere else, the Lynn terminal, I haven't cleared those people as a Methuen superintendent. Another superintendent might have, but it hasn't been me.
they do meet the state requirement. They've been quarried, sorried, and fingerprinted.
They have to go through that, and they send them to all the the superintendents in the districts that they work for.
Yep.
That, I think, is standard practice, but that's not, my standard might be very different than somebody else's standard. So I haven't seen those quarries. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So while they work for NRT and have gone through the vetting process, they haven't gone through the vetting process here in Merrimack Valley with the superintendents up here.
Mr. Chairman,
Yeah.
just as a point of information, is that what I envision, and obviously it's subject to approval of the school committee, and I had it vetted through the superintendent legal counsel, is that initially we do the FBI database. Then subsequent to that, we go to the Corey, which is not as comprehensive as the FBI database, which is 50 states. The happenstance of the allegations of what transpired, very fortunate to have it occur in our jurisdiction, because if we were relying upon just Corey, that alleged driver might have fell through a loophole. So what I envision is, for Methuen, and we got clearance to do it, is have the FBI database continue for our drivers and bypass Corey, because Corey is not as comprehensive. It's just adjudication of state matters. An FBI database it's a false sense of security. So that, what Member Shibeli is indicating, he's accurate. So if we have someone pulled from outside the community, from another district, they will be relying upon Corey as per state law. But the stronger policy that I envision, subject to approval of the school committee, would not subject them to FBI database because they're fill-in drivers. And that's the conundrum I'm envisioning that we might have a problem with. But obviously, I understand some of the part-time drivers, because of personal issues, still having them be able to work, because what's the sense of discarding them? but like the hybrid approach is going to impact us because the text, email notifications to families, that upgraded system will not work if we have backup drivers from outside the area. So that was one of the biggest stumbling points was the parents were like, we're not being notified. It's a half hour, an hour. Where is that bus? And we upgraded our system internally with text and email notifications. And we also have tracking similar to what Boston does. But if you get someone from outside the system as a fill-in, the security measure isn't up to par, and that text email notification will have to be addressed at some point for the sake of the parents. So membership really has valid points, and I've been working with the superintendent on that. And that should be incorporated in the RFP anyways at some point. But that was one of the things I just wanted to, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
So I think there's a couple of things here. We want to figure out where we are right now for this school year, right? Some of these conversations, Member Willett, that we've been talking about are all the details we want to see in the new specs, new RFP, new contract, right? We definitely, I think, all agree on some of those pieces, of which will happen in open session, which I have confirmed with legal counsel. Those conversations will happen in open session as we go through our conversations about the RFP that Rich and his team are going to help us draft. That was why we brought him on board, because he's been doing this a lot longer than we all have and has a different lens and relationship with this work. So for tonight, our goal was, and we weren't sure where we were going to be as of this moment with drivers and some of the options. I think Rich summarized it a little bit by saying we would like to open school. We have 1 through 12 this week, some K in the district, and then all of K next week. And so we want to see where we land as we open the next 5 days. And the likelihood that we have this conversation again on our September 9th meeting is probably high. And we might bring Rich back that night to talk about what our options are that evening if we still have open routes and drivers. How do we define that situation? What is the action of the school committee? And what that entails and what that allows us to do or not do to move forward to make sure that we have drivers for our students. So it was looking like we were going to need to do some of those votes tonight. But I think after today, we need to see how it opens. I think that's going to make us most comfortable. And then on September 9th, we have another discussion about how the first 6 days have gone. If we're still in the same boat and they haven't brought in office staff to fill these gaps or have hired people and we still have open routes, I think the conversation on the 9th will be a little bit different with this committee about what our next steps need to be to move forward, to make sure our buses have drivers and our kids are getting home on time. Did I
1 minute,
summarize that?
So please note that Member DeZoglio joined the meeting at 6:15. Okay. Member Willett?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I appreciate your involvement. Having your background experience is so vital on a day-to-day basis. I think it was worth having the contract because when we had the initial meeting with NRT, the corporate culture was terrible. They weren't forthcoming with information. They were obstinate. They were making referrals to regulations. And that was it from their standpoint. I think the Methuen manager, whatever transpired on that, I think it was healthy to have a new person in that capacity. What I've said in prior meetings is that they need to have, similar to other transportation companies in Massachusetts, some type of either an employee handbook or evidence of doing onboarding. Like some type of verification that they go through sexual harassment and other laws of a review or some type of an employee handbook. And I think that's a very telling thing for the company not to have either. There's like ADP, which oversees HR for like 1 million companies. So it's vital to have some type of employee handbook. And I'm old school with the handbook, so what they do now is maybe onboarding. That culture has to be improved in that regard. I know we don't have the Director of Security and Transportation, so whatever the conduit is, I know on a temporary basis, you're on the front lines, I definitely appreciate it. I know the superintendent and her staff are on the front lines. I know we're going to do everything possible to resolve the busing. The only thing else I would say is that in the recommendations, and I know the subcommittee brought it up, is that now that we're going back into school, are we going to do some type of surveying of the parents to gauge? Because like my impression is most of our drivers are excellent drivers. They don't have complaints. It was isolated incidents, but I don't know. So I want to be able to survey the parents. Is that something that either the subcommittee or the administration envisions of surveying the parents? Because I think that was one of the recommendations that you highlighted. And I think it's crucial just to gauge the parents, because we don't know. We get some of the reports, but, you know, I think it would be helpful.
Typically, we recommend a parent survey if there's ongoing problems with either communication with parents or routes where parents are vocal about the issue. Because at that point, we want to quantify what that issue is as we move through the contractual management process, especially if we have to defend our actions with the Inspector General's office or the Attorney General's office. So we want to make sure that we have documented data, and oftentimes, if we're moving in that direction, we would suggest a SurveyMonkey or one of the online surveys. But I don't think we're there yet.
The only thing I would add is that, I think you know that, we tried to launch the audit, and the feedback from the community at large, we had 18 people pull the bid and nobody bid. And it's too big a pie. So we have since split it into financial and operational. And I will tell you that I did write in there some elements of the transportation where parents and staff would be interviewed about transportation performance, right? We can beef that up. I just sent it to a member Donovan and member Shabilia. I'm happy to send it to whoever wants to read it. But, to me, rather than hit with a separate survey, do it as part of the audit and get parental and staff feedback on, what they see the transportation performance as and what's been happening.
Okay.
Okay.
Long-term, I agree with that process. I think short-term, too, the SurveyMonkey is just to gauge, because we don't know. And like I said, these could be isolated instances, and we have an allegation of a crime that's still going through the adjudication process. Now, are you seeing with the new manager a change of attitude and more open communication?
Well, I wasn't part of the problem last year, so I don't have the.
No, but I mean, are you getting, because we had really nothing. We had,
We are getting pretty much turnaround of questions and answers on the timeline that we've requested. I'll give you an example. I had sent an email on Friday indicating to your two managers that I was meeting with the school committee to report the status of drivers for the start of school. And I asked for an update before 3 o'clock this afternoon at the latest. And I received them both before 3:30. So I'm comfortable with the type and the frequency of communication. Like I said, I'm not overly thrilled with what I'm hearing and seeing, but we're moving in the right direction, and we've certainly moved a lot since Thursday of last week.
Okay. And then, through no fault of the school district, the governor did massive cutbacks to expected Chapter 70 funding. So administrative positions were eliminated. One of them was the Director of Transportation and Security. The superintendent's office, and I think whoever's involved in that process of incoming calls, is that something that, with the text and email system that we have set up, that will still continue? What is the apparatus for, because we don't have the full-time director anymore?
You're looking at him.
Okay, so Ian? All right, and I have confidence in Ian. I've known him for many years. He's a nice guy. But, I mean, that was something, too, that thrust it upon us, is that we had to do was eliminate the Director of Security and Transportation. So I just want to make sure that have open lines of communication. And again, this is healthy. And I don't want you ever perceive that we're doing an adversarial thing. We might have questions and concerns, but I want to make sure that NRT was always the focus. Like, we did internal reforms, but NRT was like multiple red flags of how they communicate to us, and the culture, the corporate culture that needed to be improved. So that, I'm all set. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Sorry I was late. It was my first day back at school, so I was working late. So yeah, I also know two people that work for NRT, and they said they were being capped hours as well. I don't know, I know Member Shabilia brought that up just a few minutes ago, but I wanted just a recap on that. What NRT is saying or doing, they're not doing that.
We said, like, that's not something they have told us. We were just, I think it was Member Shabilia who asked, do we know the reason why maybe some people are not working the last route? That's not we haven't heard that from anybody at NRT, and I don't think Rich has either. I'm not sure we would hear that. but-
If you have that in correspondence, I'd appreciate if you would forward that to me.
I could
Good.
try and ask them, it was voice. It was a voice call.
Oh.
I was just asking, and they don't want to lose it.
Well, quite frankly, if they cap
I
their-
understand. I was just asking the question if it's true, if you heard that. I'm not
Capping
saying.
hours of full-time drivers? Like, what is it specifically you
Yeah,
want us to ask?
She said that she's not working more than she has to, like in the sense of getting extra hours or anything of that sort.
Well, quite
Not being
frankly,
asked to cover extra routes,
Yeah.
if she could, okay.
Yeah,
some of your routes are longer than 6 hours a day, especially your out-of-district special ed transportation routes.
no,
Many of them are closer to, on driver time, almost closer to 8 hours a day. So to cap anybody at anything makes absolutely no sense.
Okay.
And also, your contract doesn't have that included in it. And
Okay.
so there's no reason contractually that they would have to do that.
like I said, I don't know what it was, and I know we were having a meeting. So I'm just asking that question.
Well,
and-
I think if I could help you out here, Member DeSalvo?
Yeah.
I think the question on the floor that arouses my interest is that we go to NRT and say, is there a 30-hour gap? Is there a 30-hour cap on specific drivers? And if there is, why?
Why, right?
Right?
Thank you.
That's the question,
Yep.
right? That's what you're trying to ask. So we're just trying to ascertain. I don't think we're trying to ask the schools, they would know. Is there a cap? Is it financial or otherwise? What's the reasoning for it, right? That's all we're asking.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right? Sorry about that. Member DeSalvo? Did you have anything else, Dan? No? Kristen, you good? Member Willett?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. In terms of, I know Member Shabilia and Member DeZoglio were approached about the cap. In terms of whistleblower protections, should that be in the RFP? Because if these drivers somehow think they're being capped with hours, or they have issues that they've been told, I'm just saying hypothetically, not to bring to the attention, should we have the whistleblower protections? I know we have state and federal laws. Is that something that, in your experience with RFPs, that the drivers are protected with the whistleblower?
Those drivers that are covered with a collective bargaining agreement, either through the Teamsters, United Food and Cooperative Workers Union, the steel workers that I'm aware of, the three that I'm aware of, have whistleblower protection in their collective bargaining agreements. NRT is non-union, so I'm not sure.
I mean, can we, obviously, can we impose
We can
that as part
we
of
can
the
include it in our bid
Because I'm
specifications.
concerned if drivers, and they're on the front lines, and let's say hypothetically, they have a problematic bus. And I think we have at any time the capacity to pull a videotape from the cameras. And if we need to, we can put a monitor on a bus. There's no restrictions on that. But I'm concerned is if someone wants to say something, and they're not protected under whistleblower, then that's a huge gap, too, that I think should be incorporated.
We can include it.
Yeah.
The likelihood is that it would be found to be a personnel matter
Oh, yeah.
on their side.
Yeah, like the handbook and the onboarding.
The handbook
yeah, I
and
see
some
a
of the
lot-
other things,
yeah,
but,
a lot of discrepancies.
We can include it.
Yeah.
What would happen is at the bidders meeting, the bidders would comment on it, probably would ask to have it removed, and we would discuss it at that point. But we can include almost anything we need that, within certain parameters,
Yeah.
in the specifications themselves, and then see where what the final contract looks like, the final bid spec looks like. Yeah, we've collected a laundry list already of things that we've heard over this past year from reviewing some of your previous school committee meetings, and of what we think at least the first draft of the bid spec should look like and what they should include.
Okay.
Along with the fact that, as you know, we provided technical assistance to over 300 school districts nationally. Very few of them have said our transportation program is running fine, and we have plenty of money, and we have plenty of drivers come in and take a look at us. Almost everyone, as a result of their having faced some type of a problem or issue. So we see a lot of issues, we've seen a lot of problems, and we've seen a number of ways to address and to improve them. So we draw from a lot of different resources to put together a specification that meets your requirements and that will pass muster with both the Inspector General's office for 30B and for the Attorney General's office in the event that someone files a complaint.
Because from my perspective, I think it's a reasonable expectation that we're upgrading the background checks. I think it's a reasonable expectation to improve the culture. And I think it's a reasonable expectation to have either handbook or onboarding. And in this case here, to protect the drivers, the whistleblower component, I think it's a reasonable expectation. I don't think anybody could ever question those items.
I just would, the only thing I'd say is the absence of it from a negotiated agreement with a specific driver, I'm not going to name a company, right, does not exempt it from state or federal legislation, right? I mean, the fact that we don't have a handbook or we don't have a, we don't have a whistleblower article in a CBA with NRT or any other does not exempt the company from state and federal legislation. I would strongly suggest that if a driver had a problem and it rose to that level, hopefully it never would, but if it rose to that level, they would be covered under whistleblower legislation if so, bless you. So that's
Yeah.
my 2 cents.
You're absolutely correct. Bottom line, this is a government contract.
Awesome.
Sorry, my apologies.
No, I don't know if you want to wait till later in the evening for this, but given the fact there probably are parents watching and now concerned that the first day of school, their child might not be arriving when they hope to arrive, and given the fact that we have all that construction going on around the Tenney district, it might be worthwhile if you explained what the protocols are when we have a late bus. Maybe put everyone's, at least know there's a process in place to keep everyone safe and orderly and get home as soon as we can.
Sure. From staying at school to getting notified by 1 o'clock, all those pieces? Okay. I'm like, I'm not, just want to make sure that I'm on the same page as you. Yeah, so we will keep the same systems in place that we had certainly at the end of the school year, where we had NRT had to notify us by noontime, I think it was noon or 1 o'clock at the latest, of the late buses that we were going to have those days, so that the district could communicate with the families on those buses. Keep in mind, right now, you are, and I'm being not funny, but Ian is our finance director and doing all transportation right now as well. So we're going to do everything we can to make sure that I think I went to his office 3 times today, and he and his secretary were on the phone with 3 different people and parents about bus routes. So we're going to get the communication out there, and what we found last year, and we're going to keep careful track of that, is what they told us at 1 o'clock wasn't what happened at 3 o'clock, right? So we're keeping, again, careful track of all of those things. We had some good data from January to June that we were able to track every single route and the times. That was some additional information we did give to Rich after our subcommittee meeting as well, to help look at, performance or non-performance. And so that was something else that we will be tracking as well. But we will communicate with parents. It might get, just make sure everybody reads their emails, looks at their texts for talking points. We will send those out as frequently as we need to for late buses. Again, as we know. This is the critical part for us, is the communication, right? Because it's not, when we know, we will send out information to parents.
In addition, we're going to require in the specification that the parent app, evidently Beacon is rolling out a new parent app, be live time. Posting it 30 minutes later doesn't help parents at all.
So I was going to come at that, and I was going to start by saying, I dread bringing this up, but in that disastrous presentation.
Yes, he did speak
And I
about
used
it.
the word disastrous, forthwith. There was much talk about an app that they needed a couple more months to work on, and the app was going to be ready, and that app was going to be...
In May.
I'm sorry?
Supposed to be ready in May.
You're correct. So, when people talk about specific dates, I usually write them down and remember them, and this is one I remember. So, I too, like Member Willett, think Ian is one hell of a guy, and appreciate everything he does for Methuen Public Schools and how hard he works. But I think it's folly to put all of this on any one person's shoulders, whether it's yours or his. When we had a company stand in front of us and say, we will have an app ready by May, and now we haven't heard, I don't know, maybe you guys have, we haven't heard anything about it. Do you want to talk about that, Ian? Go ahead.
Just briefly, back in May, early June, probably it might have been late May, they did send us out a training, a date for training. It's called Beacon Connect. So they did do a training.
Yeah.
And our transportation person went to that training and learned all about it. And they just emailed me. I reached out to them and said, hey, my guy who was trained is gone. So they did just email me as soon as I told them that, so that I could go spend some time getting trained in Beacon Connect. So yes, that they do have a system up. It will, as I understand, grow more parts, but they do have one for communication, for discipline of students, that kind of stuff. It's going to be all through Beacon Connect at this point, but it will become more robust as it goes forward. But they do have something up and running, and I need to get trained between now and Wednesday.
And I guess the follow-up question would be, accessible to parents?
I will know Wednesday. I haven't looked at it, so.
Quite frankly,
yeah.
if it's not accessible to parents, then
Right.
it's not helping.
Right.
Right.
It's just adding work to people who are
Right.
already overworked, right? So-
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
a
can
big
check to see if there's a, we do have access to Where's My Child, which is the tracking app, and only works if they're using the correct buses and
Right.
the back end set up correctly. And those are the buses that we usually don't need to track because the driver showed up and they're driving the right bus.
But I guess, and maybe this is my naivete, my expectation of any bus company would be, so I'm aware of Where's My Child? And when that presentation was made that fateful night, I remember that being said, that's not the app you want to use. That was, the bus company said, that's not the app you want to use. You want to use our app, right? So wait a couple of months and we'll have our app, okay? So, I mean, I hate to keep banging the drum here, but this is a perfect example of where is it, right? Not, have you trained in, what is the bus company doing to help us get that out to our parent community so that they understand what it's used for and what it's not used for and how they should best use it, right? Because otherwise, the whole thing is quite frankly, a house of cards built on, communication that we didn't see last year. We're highly hopeful it'll be better this year, and I believe you, trust me when I say, I have confidence that what you're telling me is correct. But I don't want to see it all fall down to one person who's got access to an app that may or may not tell us what, if I was the president of NRT, I would have somebody here at this meeting tonight showing this committee, this is the app, this is how it works, this is how parents can take advantage of it. Yet none of that happens, right? Without, I guess it's just too hard to me, right?
In defense of NRT,
Yeah.
they don't have a contractual responsibility to provide that.
Okay,
It's something that they're doing for their own business reasons. And ultimately, people being school districts are going to pay for it going forward because it'll be incorporated into their ongoing costs.
absolutely.
So, but
Member Willett?
Yeah, just a quick point of information. The city of Boston, they have that capacity, right? Is that the same program, or is it a separate program?
I have no idea.
City of
City of
Boston?
Boston is not a client district, so
Okay, all
I have
right.
no idea what they do or don't
Is
do.
this something that's adopted by other companies? Is it something, I'm not familiar with this, I'll do some research.
I didn't get
I
that
mean, it's-
impression when they were here.
Yeah, it's called Go
remember,
Beacon, so I'm assuming they own
Where's My
it.
Bus is something I think that's used by other companies.
Yeah.
And I know
They
the
were talking
city-
specifically an app that they were
Yes.
developing.
Go Beacon is, I think, used for their companies as a
Beacon
parent
Beacon
company.
Connect would be proprietary to Beacon
Go
Mobility.
Beacon.
Okay, that's a
Where's
good
Where's
concern.
My
I have-
Child
that's a
is
concern I have,
is an
too.
app you can buy off the
Yeah,
shelf.
because if you get City of Boston, and they have an app that's seamless, right? And then they're going through the nuts and bolts of their own program, and it's May, and then now it's going to September. And it's like, it's almost like refreshing a window on a computer. It's like, stop, still refreshing, and it's like, going from that time frame to now, it's like, I'd rather just do is just, why reinvent the wheel if something like City of Boston has? And I'm, again, I read an article on it, but I'm gonna have to go.
Well,
but this
it's certainly
because
easy enough
This is
for us.
something they did internally for their own company.
It's certainly easy enough for us to inquire what it
Okay,
is.
Just curious.
We'll
Yeah.
bring that on the 9th as well.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to, yeah.
No, it's,
And for what it's
you're
worth,
absolutely right.
respectfully, while I understand your point contractually, there's no obligation, I disagree with this
Client
is,
relations.
we've been talking about difficulty communicating.
Yes.
Right, for quite some time, right? So while there's contractually no obligation, I think if the company's interested in a relationship with Methuen Public Schools, then they have an obligation to at least say, we didn't talk about the Beacon app or whatever the heck it's called, right? That was brought up that night. And I would tell you, even though some of the school committee members have changed, for some of the people that were here, it was like, oh, we were struggling, where's my bus? When do I use, where's my bus, and when do I use this other thing, right? And the answer was, you're gonna wanna use this other thing all the time, right?
The one, Mr. Chairman, just quickly, it was ZUM was the app.
What, it was what?
ZUM was the City of Boston. So I'm just curious.
Oh, I don't know, yeah.
Thank you.
Madam Vice Chair?
One thing I want to make very clear to parents, and going forward, we need this written into the RFP, is that we need, the substitute buses are not tracked, the new drivers are not tracked, so the parent app isn't going to work on these 4 routes that we're talking about, because we're not going to have the right bus on that route. And so we need to make sure that in the RFP that substitute buses are tracked for the parents, because those are the ones that are always late, and those are the ones we want to know where our kids are. So I just want to make that clear so that parents aren't saying, I'm using this app and I'm not seeing where my kid is. It says they're at the terminal. Well, it says they're at the terminal because that's the way the app works right now. And so we need to make sure that that message is out there to parents, and that we need to fix that problem in the future.
Yeah, the app is GIS-based, which is right now probably part of the bus.
Right, and they need to
They're on the
hot swap the bus numbers on the app. If they know that bus 12 is doing bus 19's route, then they need to stick bus 12 into that in the back end so that it works.
One of the ways of fixing that is if Beacon were to purchase and install tablets for their drivers on the bus, then the tablet goes with the driver. If there's a spare driver on a spare bus, he takes the tablet or she takes the tablet, and GIS is tracked that way according to the tablet. But that's an added cost. But quite frankly, our bid specs will ask for the price of tablets because they operate like like your navigation system in your car. So almost any driver can get in and follow both verbal and map instructions through the tablet, as opposed to trying to read a route sheet and drive at the same time. And depending on what the bid results are, the school committee may or may not want to look at an alternative cost of requiring, tablets. But we will put together, some alternates for you to consider to improve the system. But perhaps you won't be able to afford it. But that's a choice that the committee will make.
Thank you.
All right. All right, thank you.
Well, as am I. Thank you.
Yes, happily. So we have in front of you tonight our new 3-year plan, a draft of that, which is, there were blood, sweat, and tears put into these ideas and concepts and key actions, putting this all together to really try to think about moving our district forward with where we've come and where we want to go. I think we've captured that, and we've been able to weave in some things that I know I've talked about over the past 3 years, felt like outliers and not quite part of the system as a whole. So this draft has been in the works for several months now, and we had our leadership team, we have a 2-day leadership academy with all of our administrators in the district a few weeks ago, and we presented this, and we took time working on this for a full day during that time with our administrators. So we're here tonight to present to you what we think is going to be our next 3-year strategy plan for district improvement. So I'm going to ask Lisa, Dr. Golubsky, to go through these with you. There are some slides that hopefully will explain some of the things that we're going to go over tonight that just will be beneficial on what some of the asterisks and numbers mean and why they look a certain way. So that was helpful. I got some questions ahead of time, so Dr. Golubsky was able to put these slides together today so that everybody could really understand where we're coming from. And I think the most important part of this process for us is also aligning our work, but also aligning our work to DESE's initiatives, bringing it to what Methuen needs. We know, and I've been in this business enough to know that when DESE aligns certain things, that means that we typically will benefit from that in the sense of resources and grants and funds, webinars, partnerships, things like that. That's where they're going to focus their attention. And so we have a lot of similarities this year with, and I think I shared that last time, of what DESE is really focused on. There's a different commissioner. The focus feels different. I think they're looking at data a little differently, which is where we've always been coming from. It can't just be one test score that defines a school district. There's a lot of other pieces that that we need to look at a little deeper, and I think that's where we're going with this plan, is going deeper, based on the information we had in the last 3 years. So with that said, I will turn it over to Dr. Golubsky, who will start us off.
Thank you, Dr. Kwong.
You're welcome.
So you have in front of you a slide packet and also the actual document packet. I'll toggle back and forth between the two, but I'm going to start with the slides to lay the foundation for how we arrived at this direction or this blueprint for the next 3 years. So first we have the educational vision of DESE, which is that all students are known and valued, learning experiences are relevant, real-world, and interactive, and individualized supports enable students to excel at grade level and beyond. So certainly all things we believe in, generally stated. And then the next slide shows DESE's strategic objectives. So the first focuses on the whole student. So joyful, healthy, supportive learning environments where students feel connected, valued, ready to learn. The second focuses on that deeper learning. So you've heard a lot this past year, and again, moving forward, you'll continue to hear about grade level work and how important that is, and real world relevant interactive work. And then their third piece is diverse and effective workforce. So preparing educators and a staff that's culturally responsive and well prepared, committed to continuous improvement, and having equitable access for students to effective educators. So within each of these bundles is a whole lot of smaller parts that we also believe in, and that set us up for our plan as well. And Dr. Kwong and I had already started banding about ideas for our plan, then saw where DESE was going and was happy to see that there was a marriage there already. And so in this first piece of the strategic objective number 1 for DESE, it talks about the whole student. The commissioner is really focused on chronic absenteeism being a metric for success, because it does speak to students' engagement and feeling of belonging and connectivity in school. It does trend itself to support students in having higher test scores, having more opportunities, making use of those opportunities, and reducing the chance that students will drop out or become disengaged. So this chart here represents across the state trends that DESE has tracked from pre-K through high school, pre-pandemic up to current day, and still how we're still not where the state would like to be. So the real emphasis is on chronic absenteeism, which I'll speak more specifically about in a bit in terms of Methuen's population. And this slide is just, in case you're unaware of the district standards and indicators that DESE sets forth. So these are the areas of which they review or audit the school system in terms of these areas. So the leadership and governance, curriculum and instruction, assessment, financial and asset management, student support, and HR professional development. And you'll see aspects of each of these woven into our plan. So the Methuen Public Schools vision, core beliefs are the same as they were for the previous plan. And what's changed is the theory of action. So we are asserting that if we aim for the objectives, which I'm about to propose and share, then we will close gaps and improve outcomes for each student. So I just want to take a moment to go over the components of the plan. So we're going to share 3 objectives. There's a rationale for each, or the logic and reasoning behind why each objective is important. 4 priority areas for each of those objectives, which we believe are high leverage pieces. So if we were to aim for those priorities or really shed some light on those areas for the next 3 years, we think we would move the needle in terms of making those gains for our objectives. And 10 to 12 key actions for each of those objectives. So I want to emphasize this is not an exhaustive list of everything that we intend to do. These are just the high leverage pieces that we're promoting and highlighting, many of which are multi-year actions. And then there's also annual measures of progress, and I'll certainly say more about that. But those are key indicators from multiple data sources that would suggest at the end of the year whether our focus on the priorities and execution of key actions are doing what we think they will, and certainly give us time to make adjustments as we move forward. Okay, so as a review of where we're coming from and where we're going, our previous objective 1 we're all familiar with, and it centered on student literacy outcomes, and that was really targeted through the skillful use of high-quality core instructional materials and interventions. So at the onset of that plan, in many areas, we were faced with the challenge of putting those high-quality materials in place, training teachers on how to use them, having that become part of the fabric of how we operate on a day-to-day basis. Objective 2 had been to increase prevention and intervention activities to lower the rates of anxiety, depression, and post-traumatic stress in students. And the third had been to provide students from historically disadvantaged groups with equitable access to an excellent education. So Dr. Kwong has said multiple times that after the plan had been developed and accepted, she felt as though Objective 3 were something that we wouldn't check off as completed in terms of offering equitable access. That's something that needs to be underlying everything that we do. So you'll see Objective 3 still remains, but it's absorbed in the new objectives in the plan. And we felt the same for Objective 2. So social emotional learning, mental health is not its own box or something that's compartmentalized, but it is a piece of everything that we do. So we hope that that comes across here. So the objectives that we're proposing for the 24 through 27 plan, the first is to accelerate literacy development and language acquisition across all subject areas. So in the previous plan, it did feel as though the literacy development was primarily the responsibility of the ELA teacher and maybe the administrators overseeing that. In this new objective, we share that responsibility, so all teachers are responsible for helping to promote literacy development, and also the language development piece in support of our English language learners. And so we'd like to see students as being all of ours instead of just owned by certain departments. In the second objective, this is something that we've seen for a number of years, and that's the disparity in student outcomes between student groups. And we mentioned this in the SOA plan. Objective 2 mirrors our SOA plan pretty closely in talking about the all students group as compared to the students with disabilities group and the English learner student group. Those are the areas where we see the most sizable disparities, not just in achievement, but in opportunity. So looking at who's enrolled in certain types of programs, who is aware of certain types of programs that may be available to them, how are we supporting students reaching the expectations, not just holding those expectations for them. And then the third piece is to enhance partnerships with students and families to increase connectivity, engagement, and belonging. And we chose that phrasing carefully. So we could have said enhance communication, but it didn't have that same meaning. We're really trying to create partnerships. And I'll say more about that as we move on. Okay, so we're slowly panning out here to see the larger plan. So we have each objective, which I just highlighted, and then the priorities for each. So these are those high leverage focus areas which we would center and work on to develop each of the objectives. So for the literacy piece, and I spoke to it briefly before, building that culture of accountability for leaders and educators, supporting students in delivering standards-aligned instruction that builds students' comprehension of texts while increasing student ownership. And from our previous screening and testing, we know that comprehension is the area that's most challenging for students across the board, so we want to hone in on that. Utilize screening and progress monitoring to track student growth and adjust instruction. So we have been screening for literacy and progress monitoring, also with the help of our TNTP partners. We're doing the same for students that are English learners. We want to hone in on that instruction adjustment. And then now that we have high quality core instructional materials in place, are we using them effectively? So a lot of these programs come with so many parts and pieces that it's really an art and a skill to know how to arrange the order of the assignments, know when to scaffold and when not. And then I'll speak to the number 2. So about the disparities between student groups. So we really want to support leaders and educators to utilize culturally and linguistically sustaining practices. We started some of that work at the Leadership Academy that Dr. Kwong had referenced. And we had a really engaging speaker come in, Edward Walker, who shared some insight on culturally responsive pedagogy in teaching and education, so that our leaders know how to help guide teachers in those areas. We want to look at the focused supports and interventions that are offered and explore how they're offered, and are we really helping all students engage in deeper learning. The co-teaching piece is something that's been on our minds for several years, and now I feel as though we have more co-taught sections and courses than previously before. So we have sections where there may be a gen ed teacher and a special ed teacher both teaching a class. We have other situations where there's a gen ed teacher and an ELE teacher both teaching a class. And so these partnerships are new for a lot of our teachers. And some may not quite be sure of what the model or exemplar looks like. How can we most effectively use these 2 experts in one room to deliver more personalized instruction? So we've already started some work in that area. And we also want to monitor the utilization of the supports that we offer to students. So John Crocker and I have talked a lot about all the mental health supports that we offer and social emotional learning. And we've had some interesting conversations about looking at the proportions of student populations to see if that usage is widespread, and if not, are we really publicizing or supporting all student groups in exercising their right to use those supports. And then to specify the priorities on the 3rd, to enhance partnerships, our first bullet there, just like Desi, talks about improving school and district rates of chronic absenteeism. So chronic absenteeism is defined as missing 10% or more of school days. So if you are enrolled for 180 days, that would be missing 18 or more days. But when you break it down over the term, the number may seem small. Kids might not realize that a college visit and not being in school counts toward that. Or maybe you're ill at home and it's an excused absence in school, but in the eyes of the state, if you're not in school, you're not in school. And so that counts as chronic absenteeism. So that rate for our accountability data is tracked from students in grade 1 through 12, and you have to have been enrolled in Methuen Public Schools at some point during the year for 20 consecutive days. So say you're enrolled for only a month and a half, and you're absent for a handful of those days, you could fall into that category. We also want to empower student voice and increase student engagement in specialty programming and extracurricular opportunities. I'll say more about that with some of our key actions. We want to provide regular opportunities for families to engage in school-related activities, join parent groups, or utilize services and programs available to them. We had some luck with some school day offerings this past year that we'd like to expand. Also offer some after-hours offerings for other families. And we generally want to increase communication to inform families about school progress and programming and garner feedback. So we're going to continue with the newsletters and notifying parents of upcoming events, but I think it's really important also to be very transparent with parents, families, and students about where they stand academically in terms of their progress, and then what the next steps would be to help them improve in those areas. So definitely a focus with progress in that area as well. Okay, I've talked for a while. Are there questions up to this point? I will get to the measures afterward and key actions, but I sense some questions brewing.
Excuse me, Member Salgo.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I don't want to be, I love the ideas of like having support clubs and all that, but the problem I have that I've witnessed a lot is holding, like, the commission is like, I'm really concerned about chronic absentees, but where are we holding parents accountable in some aspects? Because sometimes parents will decide to take their kids for a month out of school to go away, or better yet, also, and again, it's a sad world that we live in, there are parents that just don't care that their kids go to school or not. It is happening all across the country, in the Commonwealth, and I think we could put all these things in, but if we're not holding and I'm not saying the Methuen Public Schools, that's beyond our control, but the state legislation needs to do a better job of holding parents, saying, no, your kid needs to be in school. And that is what I deal with. I've dealt with it now for 3-4 years, where kids have been gone for like 2 or 3 months, and then they pop back in June, and we're like, hey, where have you been? And it's happening all the time. And legislation will always find, well, schools need to do this, but schools can only do so much. So the question I have is what is the commissioner's plan to making sure these kids are coming to school if the schools are reporting saying these kids are not coming to school?
Yeah. So, the $1,000 question. As educators, right, I've been doing this for a long time, there are certain things that are certainly going to be out of our control. What the commissioner, and I thought a few weeks ago, he did a webinar, and I would say 40 minutes of the hour webinar on his objectives was focused on chronic absenteeism and resources. And it was very clear to me at that point that this is, right, what is in our control is the engagement, the outreach, the education of why education is important, right? The bottom line is I'm not going to be able to, I hold students accountable, I hold staff accountable, I can't hold a parent accountable for their decisions. However, some of those decisions may have consequences, and I do feel it's our job and our role to then educate the parents on what are those consequences. If your child just doesn't want to come to school and you let that happen, let's talk about those consequences, right? Every team that we worked with for during the Leadership Academy, I met with the principals on a separate occasion previous to that to talk specifically about chronic absenteeism, right? It is such a challenge in a district this size to tackle, right? To make those, engage those lines of communication with the parents and teach and educate about what those consequences are, right? And as the kids get older, and I imagine that you all looked through that when we had the handbook conversation, but we decreased the number of days students could be absent for the high school credit denial. So this is everything we're doing, right, is going to have a consequence. So we can't start increasing the number of days kids can be out and still get credit for a class, because then they're just going to be out for that number of days, right, with no consequence. So we're trying to balance our community with the engagement and education. That's where we come in. And it was super clear to me that day when the commissioner spoke that that's where he's going to sink the resources. What do we need to provide our families? What resources do we need? Do we need to have more events? Do we need to go to those places? Do we need more translators? The answer is yes to all those. Yes to all those things, right? How do we make sure that parents understand the value of education here? We have families coming from all different countries, where education is very different. The system of education is different in the country they're coming from. So what is in our control to educate those families about what our education system is and how it can provide for their children? That's what is within our control to do. That's what we are prepared to do. You know, we hope that by re-engaging parents, by re-educating, by spending, like really focusing on the kids who are chronically absent. We had several schools last year. This was one of the goals of the principals, specifically a target number for chronic absentee students, right? And following them. And it was incredibly challenging to take last year's students who were chronic absent, right? We have last year's students who were chronically absent. I know who those are today. But what I don't know is the kids who are going to become chronically absent that I have to also maintain and follow, right? It's incredibly challenging to follow this, but we put some really good things in place that we think our teams can start to tackle within the education, making the relation, re-engaging students and families with attendance. So that was a really long answer, but you're not wrong in the sense that there's certain things I can't control and you can't control. But our job, I see it as our job, is to do everything we can to educate the students and the family and re-engage them into why education is important. What we offer to students is valuable for their child in all different regards, right? Social, emotional, academic, going to high school, going to secondary education, going into a trade, whatever they choose, all of those things are going to lead to that. So again, we're focused on what is with our control and what we can do to make those gains. That's where our focus is. So again, long answer, and I apologize, but.
No, and thank you, Dr. Kwong, and I know, like, for any district, that is a challenge, but for the commissioner, and again, I've listened to his statements, I've read online about what and I feel like, again, the problem that we're having, because I also see it where kid's been chronically absent, but then he's allowed to go to the next grade, or he or she go to the next grade, because we're worried about keeping him back for social emotional, but then his reading levels are down, and they go, why is that? And then it keeps going, that it's like a snowball effect. And then at the end of the day, the commissioner is saying, well, the chronic absences need to be taken care of, but then, again, we're doing all these programming, but nobody, again, sees the amount of resources that we have to pump in, because that one small problem that parents are not being held accountable bringing their kids to school. And I'm not saying to every single parent. There are times where kids are really, really sick, and they're out for 40, 50 days. That's it. But we're talking about the ones that are perfectly healthy, and the parent, and again, I've heard these situations all over the state. I have friends that are teachers that will say, parents said, yeah, I didn't wake up in time, so I didn't bring them to school today. And it's like, well, when is that parent being held accountable? And that's just, because I've heard the commissioner over and over go, I see the commercials all the time about chronic absent, bring your kids to school, keep your kids in school, but it's never solving that direct problem that's starting at the beginning. And I'm not saying all students, I'm just saying that small group of students. That's just my general
I
thing.
guess the only thing I'd add to it before I turn it over to membership is, I really like that third objective. I'd love to see something in there that says something about data. And I know I've talked about this before, right? Using data to make a correlation between student performance and parental involvement, right? So those are two different accesses. And to me, you know, setting up some kind of program that focused on trying to educate, lack of better terms, to educate parents. It says, when your child is absent this much, or can't complete, you know, these assignments, you used, you know, what's the platform called, Insight? I always
Infinite
forget.
Campus.
Infinite Campus, thank you.
You're welcome.
To me, you know, making a correlation for parents between, you know, number of days they're in school, assignments they miss, et cetera, and performance is kind of a huge thing and is hard to ignore, right, to me. Because, you know, to your point, you know, you don't want to get to the end of the year and just quote-unquote promote the child, right? And I know we have to do that on certain occasions, but I'd like to see part of that third one be, you know, a targeted program to kind of make that correlation for parents so that they understand every time your child misses a day, right, it puts them back. And we can say that a million times. They'll say, yeah, but he's, you know, relatively smart. He'll pick up, you know. Well, when you're chronically absent, that doesn't happen, right? You're missing stuff, right, that you needed. So I guess that's my 2 cents. Member Shabilia.
So just keeping on the chronic absenteeism for now, and we can get to my 1 and 2 stuff later. You said that it includes the medical absences that get reported to the state. So if you have a child that is medically complex, and that kid misses a day a week, that's going to reflect in our number.
Correct.
Do you have a mechanism for removing those kids from our number so we can see the kids that are just
We
avoiding
can.
school? You can?
Yes.
'Cause
So that's what,
the number I'd be interested in.
yes, so that's what our principals are looking at when we get the chronic absenteeism. We actually have a weekly report that's run, that's sent to them when kids hit a certain number. And the principals actually know which students are not the ones that are going to call because they have the medical excuse. But the state absolutely does not distinguish between excused absence, unexcused absence. The reason for that absence is just days missed of school. So that's why it's defined. So we may have, right, 20%, this is what you're going to see, right, 20% chronic absenteeism. We know 7% I have to put in this bucket because those are ones I know that legit are going to be out for all reasons that we would understand. Right, so now that leaves me with, all right, what's this 13%? Who are these kids that I'm going to focus on? So there is that we do internally, but externally, DESE, the numbers that you see on our accountability report are just days missed.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to fix DESE's reporting
Right.
nonsense. So when a student gets to so many days, whatever that many days may be, I look back on when I was in high school and think someone would have had a truancy officer.
We used to.
Did you find that helpful when it was in place?
I did not have, I think I was principal at the CGS when the high school had a truancy officer, and then it was just eliminated due to budget reasons. I don't think, yeah, it was a long time ago. I mean, this is the hard part, right? This is the hard part. So Lowell Public Schools is touted for having this wonderful program to deal with truancy, chronic absenteeism. They have a department and full-time staff to do it, right? So they have an offshoot of, let's say, my Family Resource Center. They have 4, 5, 6 full-time staff members dedicated to this one topic, which is great. Great, right? So they actually were one of the school districts that participated in a webinar this past spring that we all joined and everybody else around the state did to learn what they're doing. Now we're taking what we can from them and the tracking that they used and the communication they used and try to now disseminate that into buildings with principals and guidance counselors because that's who we have to do this work, right? So there's challenges around every corner to do this work as well, and we're taking it to make it so that what does our system look like? Who can be involved in the system appropriately? Because I have Ian doing transportation, right? Like, we have people doing 10,000 things. And so that was a big part of my conversation with the principals when we talked about this, right? It has to be, what are the high, and Dr. Glavsky said it, our highest leverage points, right? What is the most bang for our buck when we're talking about chronic absenteeism? Making that relationship with the student, making the relationship with the parent, right? Educating, making that phone call, right? It's what are those high leverage activities that are going to actually yield the best results? And that's what we're trying to decide. We're not going to be able to do it all because we don't have a system like that, but we're going to take from them what we can and learn and apply it where we think we can in our district.
That was going to be my next question. There are districts out there and active case studies where the investment in those truancy, I don't even know if that's the right.
No, it's,
But you know what I mean.
yeah, I actually don't know what they're called, but
Right.
that was how it was presented to us, right? Looking
Goal
at,
is being used in other districts and it's being effective. So, but for funding, it's effective in more than just Lowell, I assume. So,
I assume, they were the ones that presented, the state chose them to present in one of the webinars.
all right.
I mean, there's other districts doing things and sharing as well, but I would say the majority of the districts who are sharing do have dedicated personnel for this. They don't do anything else but look at student absenteeism, engage, re-engage, do home visits. That's it. That's all they do all day.
And is that coupled with their local PD?
I don't remember if Lowell talked about police department, no.
I will say that we do home visits here, and in partnership with a guidance counselor, SRO, a school administrator, we would go out and visit the home. But in terms of the data analysis, I think what I'm most interested in is figuring out or finding that spot of where we can be proactive. So is it X percentage of kids in grade 6 who fare this way in this course tend to be chronically absent? And they found that in Baltimore public schools. Like, where are those little points that we can interject before it gets to be a problem? I think that's the case with grade 9 credit attainment. So we really want to make sure all the kids in grade 9 get their credits, feel invested, feel successful, are ready to move on, and same thing with involvement in school activities. But certainly, I think you brought it up earlier about the sense of trust that parents have in the school system, and Desi's talked about that too, kind of waning after post-pandemic and really wanting to make sure their child is cared for. And so it's a little bit of a shift in mindset to communicate that they'd be cared for here as well in a different way too.
Member Maxwell?
So I just have a couple questions. One, with the chronic absenteeism, can we not use the computers for them to log in remotely if it is a problem? I know you said like 7% of students have legitimate reasons. Can those 7% use their remote to, no?
No, the state has already said, like, remote learning is a no, is a not in school and absent.
Okay.
The only caveat they made was during COVID, that remote days counted as days in school.
And are we limiting what activities the students can do if they are a part of that absenteeism group? Meaning, like, if you are absent 45 days and you have no good reason, really no medical reason, are you a part of the drama club, or are you?
Right, those are all things we're growing this year, but there are already rules in the handbook, obviously, about if you're absent, then you can't participate in something, so that's supposed to be a motivator for students to, if you are, we don't want kids coming to school sick, but, right, if there's an issue of abuse for days and days out of school, those are things we're all looking at as well. And I think, like Dr. Golofsky said, one of the things Desi focused on, which we did add in our plan, we like it, 9th grade is a pivotal moment in time for our students to actually get to the end of 12th grade and graduation, is the credit attainment, but also the involvement in extracurricular activities. That's a new one for us, and that was something new we heard in the spring and in the summer, so we added that to our work of that is something we can quantify and actually promote, because the high school has athletics, clubs, right, all different kinds of things that we could promote to have students in their 9th grade participate in. So some baseline data to be taken, but just other opportunities too that we're looking at to expand.
And then I just had two more questions. So this one is the updated one from today, and this one is the older version, is that right?
It's the same. I
There's
just,
no, yeah, they should be
I
the
just
same.
cut and paste it in a different format.
So this one here says, provide targeted mental health support to improve belonging, engagement, and safety among students and families. And then another one, it just says, empower student voice and increase student engagement in specific. So, I mean, it just doesn't say the same thing, so I was just wondering which one we would go off of.
I don't know which one I can talk, I'll show you the present. The presentation has probably what's best to look at. There was some discussion about whether priority should be listed as a priority or a key action, so it would be one or the other. But the presentation you have now should speak to that, so,
The slideshow?
yeah.
Okay. And then in the slideshow, it says, build student comprehension of text while increasing students' ownership. How are we going to do, can we include more writing? Can we include vocab? Because I think that a lot of our comprehension issues have a lot of focus on vocab. These kids aren't having vocab tests or spelling tests, and even if they are, they're on the computer so they can spell check.
Yeah, those are parts of the ELA curriculum, but definitely part of the language development and literacy more generally. So whereas we were focused on just those literacy screeners as our only data point, I think you'll see the measures are, there are more measures and from a variety of lenses. So certainly like the ELA scores, student growth percentile would speak to their ability to write as well. The access testing that English learners take has the 4 domains of reading, writing, listening, speaking as well. So there's different measures for that too. But
So
yeah,
are
we're
we
looking, and that's the way literacy shows up in a lot of other subject areas too.
So are we going to implement more writing and more vocab and spelling and all of that, or no?
The curriculum, ELA curriculum will remain the same because those are the high-quality pieces.
So
that
no
are-
vocab test, no spelling test, no, nothing like that, correct?
Vocabulary is assessed. I think it might be different from, like maybe the matching quizzes that you or I used to take, or the term and you define it, so that we use vocabulary is assessed most often through context. So being able to study a word's definition and then come up with it after you've rehearsed it is a much different skill from encountering a text cold, encountering a new word and be able to decipher its meaning from the clues around it. So we're aiming for that, so that the student would eventually become self-sufficient in encountering texts. But certainly there's vocabulary, pre-reading vocabulary would be something that all teachers would do. Deep dives into language is essentially that, diving into the vocabulary, helping students break down words, find the roots of those words, find commonalities, cognates. So we do a lot
But not
of
the
that.
actual, like a vocab test would be like, what, this is this word, and this is the definition of this word. Use this word correctly.
That's one form of a vocab test. Yeah, we do gauge their usage. So it's,
Gauge it, but I'm just asking if we are going to implement it, because we don't do that. We don't have vocab tests, we don't have spelling tests, we don't have that. We assess it, but we don't.
yeah, an assessment, I'm calling an assessment a test, and the vocab that we're asking them to look at and decipher is a
On a
lot.
computer.
No, not necessarily, it could be hard copy too.
Okay.
But it's a higher skill to be able to look at that text and decipher contextually, but there certainly are terms that we would pre-teach and assess.
Okay.
I think there's a piece in here that speaks to the equitable grading practices, and I think that might tie into your question a little bit more, because that key action talks about making sure the grades that we're giving kids truly reflect their progress in the standards, and they're not inflated by other pieces, but it's really like honed in on what students can do, aligned with those standards specifically. So vocabulary and language is a fifth of all of the ELA standards. So if we really hone in on communicating that progress to parents, and perhaps maybe that's something that was flawed in the past, is that communication as to how the student was faring in vocabulary to them and their families, and that's something we need to improve. But
Okay.
it's been a part of it, yeah.
I'll wait to see the key components, and maybe I won't
Okay.
have a follow-up. I don't know.
Okay.
I just think that when we're trying to improve comprehension rates, kids need to know the words that they're reading, you
Right.
know, so.
And Willett?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And just to go over the truancy aspect of Representative, Member DiZoglio highlighted, it's a major issue, but we also have to take into account that it's a misnomer to say that we're just, similar to other districts, just pushing the kids along to the next grade, and that's not accurate. Because if they're not doing the coursework and they're missing, engaging in chronic absenteeism, for instance, with the MIAA, they have to maintain positive academic standing. So the credit denial policy actually allows students to regain those skills, to make up the coursework in order to go into the next grade. Because the one thing we have to be concerned about is if we have kids repeating, then they're gonna more than likely drop out of school. So I think the credit denial policy empowers the school system and the students as a second chance. They have to do the coursework. They have to make up the examinations. They have to have in-depth knowledge. And then they also have to participate in summer school. And if they don't do the credit denial policy and fulfill the rigors of that, if they don't complete summer school, then they cannot engage in sports. So if that translates into extracurricular activities, but I know for a fact the MIAA has a strong academic standing policy, that you have to be involved in that. And then I think when we talk about the whole student, it also has to involve the whole family and doing outreach. And I know the mayor, they have a program down in the Arlington neighborhood where people can go and sign up for services. And it's a big debate about should we be social workers as well as academics. And I think what the mayor's doing with that program is a one-stop shopping for families, because they might be dealing with mental health services. They might be dealing with the need for EBT benefits. They might be dealing with health care. They might be dealing with job employment. So the one-stop center that the mayor established, I think, is in the right direction. So I think that the communication is there. And it's a misnomer that the students are being pushed to the next grade. I know it's happening in other school districts, and it's well documented. But I think that you have to meet the benchmarks. The credit denial policy, I think, gives them a second chance. Going to summer school, and then it's a linkage to, if you do all those things and you pass those courses and you do summer school, then you can get into the good graces of sports again. So that MIA, academic standing policy, if that maybe helps with people with extracurricular activities, but again, what Member Shabilia indicated too is that you have a cohort of people who have chronic illnesses or who might have mental health, illness. And those might be through a doctor, those might be excused absences versus unexcused absences. And like the superintendent said, going into this fall, and then when you have a new session at the State House in January, I think we have to formalize a letter to the legislative delegation is that we're drowning in unfunded mandates. They're studying us in Beacon Hill, and they have a $9 billion rainy day fund, and we're getting shortchanged financially at the local level, and we're getting drowned in paperwork requirements. And I know it's the federal government and the state government, and so we're focused on the paper chase, where all these goals are noble, But if we're completing paperwork and we don't have the finances to deal with those population centers of English language learners and recent migrants and people with mental health issues, and again, it's a direct correlation with COVID. You could see it with the mental health skyrocketed. Chronic absenteeism, you can see it right when COVID hit. And now it's going downward, but then you're going to deny us funding at the local level? And then you're going to still have these oversight requirements and these benchmarks? It's not fair to the school district, and I've been saying this since January. And I have other questions, but that was something the whole student really has to be whole student plus like whole family. And it's a big debate. Should the school system be involved in that? I think we do to a certain extent. We try to help these kids. We do the outreach to the parents. And I know the mayor's doing it as well with that one-stop center. But it's something that if we don't get the assist, again, it's like examination of a microscope of the school districts, but you're not giving us financial resources, and then like Holy Family Hospital in Stewart, that's going to be close to $1 billion. And then the illegal alien situation is going to be like $2 billion. And then you are doing 9C cuts, and then you're limiting us on Chapter 70. You're not going to meet the benchmarks if you don't provide the financial resources and you try to reduce the paperwork requirements. It's just not fair to us. Target the different populations, but provide the funding to help us at the local level. Thank you.
Madam Vice Chair.
Thank you. I have a couple questions. The first one is on the literacy one. I noticed at the beginning you're including K-12 now versus K-8. I want to know, does that mean that we're going to start implementing screening and progress monitoring in 9 through 12? I guess that's my question.
Yes, so we currently have a screener progress monitoring tool through Savas Pearson, which we use beginning, middle, and end of the year. We don't necessarily love it. So the department chair for English at the high school has been hunting around to see if there's a new measure that we could use. In the past, we had used the Reading Plus Insight Assessment, but when we started using it with the upper school too, the kids were over it by the time they got to the high school. We were looking to measure other aspects besides the reading comprehension. We're looking at all the different benchmarks and standards. So what's been helpful in the past is when we give that baseline, the department chair, in collaboration with the teachers, would identify maybe 3 or 4 target areas or standards where our students on the whole maybe needed a little bit more development, and then we would track those throughout the year. And so sometimes students might not realize that's happening because they've gotten a little bit adept at weaving them into existing tests and scoring them as different items. But yes, we'll be moving toward that. And then the kindergarten first and second had always been screened, but we hadn't necessarily targeted them on the previous plan. And so we figured if we're expanding, that would be a smart thing to do.
Great. I'm glad to hear that we're going to include the high school now, because I feel like that's been a big hole, so I'm glad to see that. 2 more questions. When you're talking about engaging extracurricular activities for students, are we including especially kids with disabilities, but in particular the kids in the sub-separates who are going to require support? And if so, how are we going to do that? And in addition to that, have you thought about how you're going to communicate that to parents? Because even at the high school, kids who are in sub-separates don't know about the extracurriculars. I can speak from personal experience that I don't know when Best Buddies is happening. I don't know when the sports are happening for the disabled kids. And so my kid misses out on it because I simply don't know and he can't tell me. And so I want to know that that's a hole that's really there. And I want to know that we've thought about addressing it and that those sort of things are going to happen.
Yeah, I think you're seeing what we're seeing, which is one of the reasons for this objective, is that piece of opportunity and communication. And I think that we have a lot of excellent things happening in the district that people might not even know about before we even get to why they're not accessing them and other barriers. So I would agree with that.
And then my last question is, on the last bullet, it says, increase communication to inform families about school progress and student programming and garner meaningful feedback. What do you define meaningful as, and who's going to determine that?
Not Facebook.
Okay, that's a good question, too. So we wrote in that we do, meaningful means gathering feedback that is detailed enough that it paints a picture for us that really clarifies the perspective of the whole, or maybe different groups within the whole, but also has enough detail that we can then form action plans to address or redirect or change aspects of our programming or culture or communication. So one of our first action steps, we were talking about the culture piece and the connectivity piece. I met with a company today who offers, it's a really impressive dashboard. We'll have to see what the cost is, but some surveying tools where they administer the survey to students and families, and it's benchmarked almost as if it were a literacy assessment, but you can look to see, you know, in what areas do we need improvement, and then are we trending in the right direction? Is what we're doing working or not? And so that's what we're looking, is to A, find the tool, B, gather that feedback. We've tried over the years to do the Google surveys or like the quick polls to families, but this would be something that's a little bit more comprehensive. There's also the vocal survey that goes with the MCAS, but after students are, you know, in the MCAS mindset and are quickly responding to survey questions about the culture of the school, it's a little tricky. So we think that that might be a more meaningful way to gauge that feedback. And also there's multiple parent organizations and PACs, if you will, and we do rely on that feedback to direct a lot of our programming.
That sounds really good. I'm excited to hear that you have a tool that you're actually going to get data from. That's fantastic.
Yeah, and the capabilities of the tool are really exciting because it could integrate MTSS information, screening information about the student from year to year. It could like engage with the family's attendance at events, so when you fully understand the student when you call them up on the dash. So we'll have to see. That's been one of the big, one of their big, I guess, accomplishments is helping districts not solve, maybe reduce that chronic absenteeism rate like we talked about, and they're shown to move test scores from just compiling the data that way. But what initially drew us to them was that survey component. So updates on that to come.
Excellent, thank you.
Member DiZoglio.
Yeah, just to respond to what Mr. Willett said to me. Working in a high school, yeah, I know how that works. I worked with Mr. Corrett at Havel High and Ingenuity, and he's not here. I was just saying, he was just part of it. And working with Ingenuity and know the whole MIA. I was talking about elementary and middle school, where a kid could have chronic absences and be pushed along. And that happens in pretty much every district. And the superintendent will probably vouch for me, like, it's a very hard to keep a student back, and especially middle school and elementary, especially when they have chronic absences.
Yes.
Yeah, so that's what I meant by when they push along, and then you see them hit high school, and they wonder why they're struggling still, because they never got that basic foundations in elementary and middle school. And that's where I wanted to talk to the commissioner about, is what is he doing when it comes to the elementary and middle school level to stop those chronic absences, because the state has put a lot of hold on the schools of keeping students back, especially in elementary and middle school. I have no problem keeping students back, because I was kept back in first grade, because I had ADHD and I was diagnosed with a disability, and my parents said he should kept back, and I thank them every day for it, because it helped me learn those basic skills that I needed to get through to high school and going to college and end up where I am today. So that's what I was trying, I just wanted to just make sure that people understand at home. I understand the high school level where you have all these opportunities, but the problem is where I want to address to the commissioner is maybe we wouldn't have these many issues in the high school level if we attacked these different groups when they're in middle school and elementary school. That's all.
Thank you. I'm a big fan of primary material and backup resources. When we talk about Blue Engine and I Decide and Strong and other acronyms, similar to what we did for the special ed programs, and there's a whole litany of special ed programs, can we get like a summary of these different things like Blue Engine, I Decide, Strong? Where is the funding coming from? What is the purpose of it? Is it grant funding? Is it a permanent funding? You know, when you talk about these different things, and I think that when we've had these multiple conversations, I think one of the test vehicles was taken away, and we were concerned about that through no fault of our own. And then the latest testing vehicle, I think, allows for a greater diagnostic aspect to it, and I think that's important in terms of data collection. And I think the modest goals that we're doing going forward, I think what the mayor was saying back earlier this year when we were the new school committee members, is I think incremental improvements and then assessing those incremental improvements. And experimentation, I don't have a problem with that. New programs, testing vehicles, diagnostic tools, what's available to us, I don't have a problem with that. And then we, as a school committee, will do a deep dive and pose questions and analyze things. I don't have a problem with that. The elephant in the room, and I think hopefully the school committee as a whole will take a position on it at some future meeting, is that there's a movement to take away the mandatory element of MCAS. And I think taking away the mandatory element of MCAS, and people with IEPs know that there's a portfolio aspect of it, and there's reasonable accommodations with testing. But the MCAS system was like the standard for the planet, and there's a movement to take away the MCAS requirement. And I think that's going to wreak havoc with those future test scores. Because if you take away the MCAS requirement, and again, we're talking about standards alignment, and in certain states that still have it with the MCAS requirement. If we take that away, I think we're going to have difficulty of maintaining those test scores. And that's something that's a political thing. It's not something, but I mean, they tried it with colleges and universities of saying, we're not going to do SATs, we're not going to do ACT, we're not, we're going to look at your grades from school and we'll make like a nice interview and that's it. And if you can't measure the student and there's no requirement to measure the student and there's not a graduation requirement to have like standards in measuring the student, I think you're gonna go downward. That's just my opinion. I know the governor's on record in opposition to that ballot question number 2. Hopefully at some point the school committee here will take a stance on it. But I see dark clouds ahead on that. Because we're trying as a school system to, because of COVID, we got whacked big time with remote learning and chronic absenteeism and an influx of mental health cases, and we're starting to rebound. And now you're pigeonholing us on funding, and then there's a movement to take away MCAS as a requirement to graduate. So what would be the equivalent standards? And that's and that's the problem I'm having. So I like the incremental nature of what we're doing. We're not going 85%, 80%. I think we're doing incremental on the AP and on the different testing. I appreciate that. I think that's more in line with what the school committee was following in terms of philosophy. But if we take away the MCAS requirement as a ballot question in the fall, I think it's going to be repercussions for future test scores. It's just my opinion. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Yeah, I think that ushered us along to the next slide I had. So I'm just going to go out of order to show you this chart here in the presentation, talking about those incremental targets that Member Willett brought up. So the purpose of this table is to show you the measures of progress that we would intend to use, which align with each of the 3 objectives, and then which of those measures actually are using the accountability targets set by DESE, and which were those smaller incremental targets that we had created. And so I think one of the goals for this plan was to kind of sync all of our pieces together, so to align the SOA, to align our accountability targets and goals, to align our strategic plan, so that we're all pulling in the same direction and can speak to what it is that we're aiming for. And so you can see here, for Objective 1, we had those proficiency screeners, although expanded in grades, as was pointed out earlier. The ELA average composite scaled score, and the percent of students making progress toward English proficiency. And so the scaled score is what's really used to gauge achievement in ELA from the MCAS in terms of accountability data. The students making progress towards English proficiency speaks to the individual targets that each English learner has for the access exam, and if they meet that target and are making their own incremental progress toward becoming proficient in English, they're credited there. And then the student growth percentile is for Objective 1 and 2. So how much are students improving based on students who scored similarly in the previous testing cycle? So we're looking at growth and also achievement. And then for Objective 2, it continues on with the percentage of students meeting or exceeding expectations on MCAS, English and math, percentage of students passing all grade 9 courses, proportion of student groups utilizing tiered mental health services, a number of students in 11 and 12 enrolled in advanced coursework, which is defined as advanced placement courses, courses that use Project Lead the Way, our CTE coursework, other advanced courses such as pre-calculus or chemistry. And then for Objective 3, we have that chronic absenteeism rate, which we've spoken about, those culture surveys, the percentage of grade 9 students in at least two school-based activities, and the percentage of students with anxiety, post-traumatic stress, or depression. So although some of these measures may look familiar to you, or the topics may look familiar, there are some areas where we haven't collected specific data or organized it by student group. So for instance, the number of grade 9 students enrolled in 2-based school activities, we don't have a baseline for that. So we see that kids are active, but we don't know if it's the same group of kids that are being highlighted the most or going out there and getting involved in the clubs and activities. Is there a certain profile of student who's more apt to be involved or not? If not, what are the barriers to that? So we're interested in engaging in that work too. And the same goes for the advanced coursework at the high school. Do families know that the CT program is available to them and how to access it? So a lot of these measures and objectives, a lot of our key actions may bleed into one another because increased communication underlies all these areas, although we're primarily mentioning it in 3, for instance. And then finally, I have this slide on the figures that we're waiting on. So you notice there were some asterisks in your packet. We're waiting on the 2024 baseline accountability data and our official state, district, and school level MCAS results that we're able to share publicly, and those will be out mid-September. But I wanted you to have some ballpark of where we stood in those areas, so I provided the 2023 baselines, and those are marked by the asterisk. And also, in the rationale, the enrollment numbers and student group numbers for this coming school year, I just wanted to make note, we still have students enrolling, we still have students language testing, and that will continue until October, when we send in our foundation enrollment on which the budget is based. And still, students will keep coming and enrolling. We're happy to have them. And we update that enrollment in March and in June. So we don't have the 2025 enrollment student group numbers yet, but we'll be able to provide something solid in the fall. And in mid-September is when those true measures would come. The incremental accountability data targets were provided in 2023 through 2027, which is why I was able to put those in. Okay, and then if I go back to the document, I'll just show you. I just wanted to do some quick highlights of some key actions, and then I'd be happy to address any further questions. So the first, with that literacy and language development, we're going to continue with the professional development on the use of our core and supplementary resources, but also talking about making sure that we're standards aligned and focused and letting the students do a lot of the work in the classroom with the teacher as facilitator. We're looking at our observation tool. Always has highlighted some focus indicators that pair well with our district plan to kind of cue up the administrators on what they're looking for when they go into a classroom. We're going to identify which of those indicators best jive with this plan and make sure that all the evaluators are calibrated when they're going in. So we're looking for the same things. Our feedback to teachers is meaningful and consistent and actionable, and that we're opening those doors for conversations with educators. Each school's creating walkthrough schedules for the year, and we are identifying a few walkthrough tools which the principals will select to use in different trimesters depending on their focus. So it might be cultural responsive practices. It might be that they're looking for that standards aligned questions and challenging tasks. It might be they're looking at small group instruction. But as they're continually going through rooms, you want that to be a common practice so everyone can speak to the instruction that's going on and everyone's getting ample feedback. And then as we have some newer staff, and also we have a significantly large population of staff in this district that would like to have some support with planning resources and templates and protocols for their use. So again, we would make sure that these jive with the plan and that teachers have a template of what their lesson should look like and all the components, and then they can build from there. So a starting off point. In Gleam, I probably won't be mentioning as much because that's done now. Now we're on to LAN. So same idea, just different acronym. So that's the Learning Acceleration Network. We have the same coaches we had with the Gleam grant. We're going to do the same walkthroughs. We're going to do the same progress monitoring of classes. And they're even going to continue to support with some professional development. And so that's a 2-year free network participation that we're able to work in. And then Elevation is a tool that we use to organize our English learner information and teaching tools. So we have it, it's ready, we know teachers log in. What we want to do is make sure that we're maximizing our use of it. So a real emphasis on getting to know the student in front of you rather than just knowing their labels or what categories they may fit into. what can they do, what do they need support with, and how can you best help them deepen their learning. So that's a real focus of ours. Principals suggested that we continue with professional learning communities that focus on those indicators and priorities, and allow teachers to participate in learning walks too. So sometimes the best professional development is being able to walk through the rooms and pick up some of the great things that colleagues are doing. Teachers don't always have the opportunity to do that. So we would open that opportunity if teachers were able to share their practice with others or wanted to learn as well. And then I've already started creating the district-wide assessment calendar that really incorporates every screener and standardized tests that we give K-12. And so what we're trying to do is be mindful of when we're administering those tests and make sure that it's being done with fidelity. And then key in on the data-informed instruction. So how can we expand our examination of literacy data so we can collect all the data we want, but if we're not talking about it and acting on it, it's just there. And so we want everyone to have a hand in that process. So I'll be going to the schools and supporting in some data instructional discussions and practices, and building principals will as well. And then we're going to create a multi-year cycle for the review and revision of those high-quality instructional materials that we mentioned in the previous plan. So rather than it just being a spotty process of when grant funding is available, we'd like a cycle for revision of different subject areas and grades that's consistent and expected. Do you suggest I just zoom through the other two and then move on? Other questions?
Questions on that one?
On objective 1.
So not really questions, just one comment.
Yep.
My only ask going into the next 3 years of the next phase of this is to keep the reporting consistent.
Yes.
I know that was something we had.
We heard that loud and clear. We were already.
We also look forward to doing that. I think
Yes.
Right, and I think it makes it
Me
easy
too.
for everybody. And I mean, you can always make more graphs,
Yes.
but keep the old ones coming too. So,
Yes, thank you. Yeah, we've been talking about setting this up to then figure out what that ongoing presentation is so that there's a regular expectation of, we're looking at these district numbers, this is what we're gonna vote, we're gonna have these numbers. I think the difference this time too that we've been talking about is all of this data is gonna come at very different times for us. That's gonna be a little bit unfamiliar territory, right? We can't report anything out for MCAS until October, until the embargo's lifted. So that's gonna be an interesting time for us to add numbers to this, right? Our internal assessments might happen for literacy at a certain time and then other subjects at a different time, like the screeners and things. So we've been trying to figure out that balance of here's the chart, here's what we have now, and how do we present that to you? Because it's not all gonna happen at once, which is a little bit of an uncomfortable place, but a place that I think we're happy to be in because I think we're looking at the right things over a course of time. But yes, thank you. That was my long response to that. But yes, we're very excited about coming up with
I like that idea too.
a template.
I look
yeah.
forward to that.
Yeah.
I'm happy that you're happy.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to move on to, all right, objective 2, key actions. This is the disparity between opportunity and achievement gaps that we're concerned about. So first, if you scroll down to the measures of progress, I mentioned what they were. You'll see on this chart here, they're separated by student group. So all students, L and former L, and students with disabilities will be the 3 groups that we'll be looking at. And again, this aligns with our SOA plan. So the first action is to establish those equitable grading practices to inform instruction and effectively communicate progress towards standards. So we're going to need to do some professional development in that area, and again, consistent communication to make sure everyone's on board. So if we're saying this curriculum's of the highest quality, the assessments are excellent, that there's performance assessments, traditional tests, essays, and whatnot, we want to make sure that that gets on the report card And those are the assessments that families are seeing, so that they're able to tell in what standards their students are succeeding or not. In the standards-based report card, sometimes it's easier to do, and then the letter report card, that's through 7 through 12. But we've already created some really nice pacing and assessment guides for teachers, so they'll know in some areas what grades should be going on as summative assessments for instance, ELA grade 7, and so that we know it's consistent and that it's showing progress in all the standards, just not one that we maybe happen to give more tests in that term. That shouldn't be the case. Another piece of equitable grading is to make sure that all students are supported in reaching those high expectations. So for instance, if you were an educator and you knew a student was having a tough time at home, you may be inclined to give them something a little lesser to not stress them out, and that's actually the worst thing you can do. It's doing them a disservice, because now they have a gap in terms of that learning experience as well. So what you can do as an educator is support them with scaffolds, interventions, chunking out the project to help them accomplish it, maybe changing the timeline, whatever they may need, but that standard of work is still held at the same. That's what we're aiming for there. The tiered support process exists, and it's alive in the schools. We want to enhance it. That's part of our SOA plan. So we want to make sure that the data collection is seamless, that teachers are given strong recommendations for interventions, that kids have enough time in those interventions to see if growth is being made, and if not, an adjustment is made as well. That was part of the conversation we had at that company I was discussing earlier. And we have those processes in place for academic side, behavioral, social emotional, but we want to make sure everyone in the building understands their roles, and that it's not just falling on one or two people, but that it's really a team effort. The WIN block and reading success block at the grammar schools are very important to us, and we want to make sure that we're effective in our instruction there. So we do have some curriculum pieces that help guide reading success. We want to make sure the data we're garnering from those screeners, we're actually using to adjust the groupings or instruction, and that it's targeted. And WIN stands for what I need. So we do want to make sure the kids are getting what they need during that time. So we do have some kids who might in the first screener show that they're beyond grade level. So what is it that they need in that WIN block? We need to make sure that they're challenged as well too. Okay, and then the interventions at the high school, we've had long-standing referral processes and structures, and we analyze that data pretty regularly. We want to revisit those and make sure that the students who need to access those interventions can do so, and that the flow chart of for each student, sometimes they need more than one thing, the flow chart of priority makes sense. We're going to look at academic enhancement, which is a support block for students who take AP classes, make sure that that's being used well. And in terms of our chronic absentee conversation, the high school does something interesting where they offer vacation school and Saturday school. So kids who maybe had a term where they're absent more than they should have been for one reason or another can attend during those days to try to recover some time. Nothing truly replaces being in the original class, but to be with a certified teacher and be working on your assignments do help. So you want to see who's tracking that and accessing that. So we're going to look at maybe potential disparities in enrollment there as well. We're not sure. Blue Engine is our partner to help us become better inclusive teachers. And so we're targeting in year one, we have 3 pairs at the high school, 3 pairs of teachers who have volunteered to be coached and engage in feedback cycles and to be visited by Blue Engine and also our administrators and learn what it means to be a truly inclusive teacher. And they'll also participate community of practice in year 2. We're going to expand that model, so those 3 pairs will become are like pinnacle models for the district. Blue Engine's also going to provide professional development to all teachers regardless. So we're excited to see that. They'll also help us look at the master schedule to see if any changes can be made to offer better support for teachers to plan together. Teachers are always looking for time to plan with their grade level peers, their subject level peers, their co-teachers, vertically aligned to plan. And so we'll be looking at that and seeing if any other changes may be necessary. We're going to create a new district accommodation plan. We have one posted on the website that needs revision. It hasn't been updated in a while, so we'll be doing that and sharing with teachers. The I Decide program is for students in grades 5 through 12. It's a drug education curriculum. We had it years ago as a deterrent to suspension. So when students could maybe spend time in the I Decide program to learn about their behaviors and coping strategies and whatnot, which we thought was maybe better than just excluding someone from school. And it's going to look a little different now, and it's going to be more formalized in its rollout, but that's through grant funding, as is the Strong program, which is a DESE vendor to train the counselors to support newcomer groups. There's going to be a lot of collaboration with the ELE administrators as well, because they're most familiar with the students and families coming in, but to offer that social emotional support to students and their families. And then collaborative problem solving, which you've heard before. We are deepening our training on that. So whereas we have administrators who are certified, they're going to advance to become trainers, and then we're going to have a train the trainer model where we're going to expand, and so we'll be able to support more students through those collaborative problem solving discussions. And so both with Strong, I Decide, and CPS, a big part of this over the next 3 years will be to not just implement, but collect data, make adjustments, and change the program as needed going forward. I'll pause there.
So this goal, unlike goal 1, is not a really data-driven goal. So my big question is, how are we going to measure and report on this? Like how's that gonna look?
At the quarterlies, I'm guessing. They're asking, because we have the student growth percentiles for MCAS, and we have the percentage meeting and exceeding, so growth and achievement. The percentage passing grade 9 courses, we think is important, and the enrollment in advanced coursework is for access, but also opportunity. And then the proportion of groups taking advantage of these different supports, we think would also show advancement in the priorities and therefore move us on the objective.
Because when I look at it, some of these key actions, first off, the starter here, establish equitable grading practices, communicate progress. I feel like we did that one last year. So wasn't that part of the second goal last year?
We did the book study. We're looking at equity in a number of areas. I think last time we looked at like enrollment in AP classes, but we never had anything in terms of grading practices that are going to be consistent.
Getting into the mental health, and then you had mentioned earlier the sense of trust, that's been the big focus. Cartwheel, what's the other one? Care Solace. I know at one point during the summer, we had gotten an email from Department of CPHC. I'd be curious to know how they fit into this, knowing that both of those services are going to be I would like to see how that integrates, and I would also be interested in knowing the Saturday vacation school utilization. And how that's been affected. Is it something that's working in the high school, possible to roll broader? That'd be something I'm sure we'll have.
Yeah, that's the trick of it. Yeah, we do have some title funding that we used to support that, and we had the ESSER and Acceleration Academy funding that helped. The data that we've collected on that shows that it is successful. So yeah, I think if we did plan to expand it, we just have to be really clear about who's eligible or not. And sometimes the high school students don't quite need the busing that the grammar schools might as well. So we'd have to maybe figure that out, but it would be something that the team would look at, I think, for sure.
You know, it seems to me that one of the biggest challenges here will be time. There's a lot of PD, I'm looking in the previous goal, PLCs, supporting teachers and, you know, getting into elevation, which has been around for a while. And it's a wonderful tool. The co-teaching, the training for that, I'm sure that's going to be a big challenge, finding the time to do it and to do it meaningfully and with accountability. So I'd be curious to see what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, I think it's really important to not let any of those topics fall out of the conversation either, which could be easy to happen if
Yeah.
you turn your head. So we've been looking at being creative with the professional development time and offering micro sessions or doses that hit upon a central element and maybe each of our PD days. So even if a teacher needs to go off to another training, they still hear the message. Our collaborative time, our common planning time will have to be used really well, as will building meetings and department meetings. But that's one of the things I think I'm looking forward to and looking at potential scheduling to allow for those co-teaching pairs or collaborative planning sessions to happen with the templates and resources we'll be able to share. I will say that most of these actions are things that we have notions of how we'll start spiraling into this year. And they're certainly not just drops in the bucket. It would take 3 years to really see the fruits of the labor. I think year one's going to be a lot of fact-finding, information finding, just starting the plans. But then to see real growth, I think it would take a little bit of time.
Is
Do you
the
agree?
PD Council
Yep, yes.
still around and
Yes.
participating and will be part of this planning? Okay. My other question is, the wind block, now that's always been a challenge, again, with some accountability. How will you be measuring the efficacy of that?
Well, in some of these measures, it's hard to pull apart which variable
Yeah.
brought about the biggest change. But I think consistently being in those rooms for administrators doing walkthroughs will be important, even just if it's a pop-in, and teachers owning the data, I think, of the reading and also other subject areas is important. What I've heard from the upper school teachers with the wind block is that it's a really good problem to have, and that they all want the students with them and see a need and time for them. So for sharing students who need multiple supports, I think that that's something at the high school when they have the flow of intervention. So each student and teacher knows when they get which dose of which subject when. We're going to have to be really careful with that rotation in the upper school. But I think it also starts with the resources and the interventions too. So we don't necessarily want the wind block to be a carryover or extra time to finish
Homework.
whatever you
Yeah.
started in the subject specific class,
Yeah.
but what are we doing to target those particular skills? So having those tools and resources for the teacher to draw from, I think are going to be really important.
And maybe with the tiered support process being slightly revised, that information would feed into But I can see now it's not going to happen overnight, as you said. Okay. And my last comment is, you mentioned the Saturday school or vacation. And it's something to get to the attendance issue, I just did some research. We spoke about what Lowell has done, and it's crazy how they were able to utilize Saturdays and school vacation for attendance recovery. And also academic work done. It's a lot of work, but I certainly hope if there's any money, if there's any grants, we'd be able to put that in place. But then again, who's going to do it? You know, that's a big ask.
And how the kids are going to get there, yeah. So
Well,
those are the grants we're hoping for, right?
I'm
With the
hoping,
state
yeah.
focused on some of that. This past year, they didn't offer a lot of funds to actually execute that stuff. They offered resources, webinars, information, right? To get us on the same philosophical platform as where DESI was. So we are anticipating, I am anticipating,
I'm
very
hopeful.
hopeful, that there's going to be some additional monies for the actual execution of some of these that they touted last year that said, these are some of the districts that did things that worked. Here's maybe some funds to get this off the ground, and we could have some of those in place. So I'm hopeful, and yes, of course, we're always going to look for grant money that is applicable to any of the work that we're
Yeah.
doing, but that's been the biggest conversation, I think, when we've talked to the grammar school staff, and you as well, when you were there, is how do we get kids there, right? Because the biggest cost for these Saturday schools or vacation schools is not the actual execution of the people there. It's if we have buses, how do we get the kids there? If they don't have transportation there to assist, it's that's where the money really plays the biggest role, is the transportation, if we're going to have buses or not, which we talked about even with the high school.
Yeah.
And we just, wasn't feasible for us this past year, but we did do some of it through other grant money, the transportation part.
Well, I like the idea that you said you're going to look at what other communities are doing.
Yeah.
And I know I refer to Lowell again, but I'm just so impressed what they achieved. And I don't think they had buses. I know one of the city schools that took kids from all over, a middle school, did not have bus transportation, but they worked so hard on the front end in communicating with the parents. But that was with a dedicated social worker, which is something we don't have, but, okay, so fingers crossed for that. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Madam Vice Chair?
One of the biggest problems I see with the numbers for the students with disabilities, and probably with the Ls too, although I don't have the experience with the Ls, is time, right? Just like what Member Donovan was saying, is time. These kids learn slower, and they need more time. And I think that our utilization of ESY is abysmal, and I know that we do what we have to do per the state, and we meet those bare minimum requirements, but we're only preventing regression in that time. We're not helping these kids move forward to let that gap get smaller. And we need to start utilizing that time to help these kids move forward, to make that gap smaller with their peers, to really look at, and I know this is a money thing, I understand that, but we really need to be looking at 12-month programming for some of our students who are really far behind. And that would keep more kids in district, which would save us money in the long run. And we need to look at that ESY piece differently. And we need to utilize it to really move our kids forward, not just prevent regression, because basically we're babysitting for 6 weeks for no good reason. And, many parents feel that those 6 weeks are a huge waste of time. So we really need to reassess what we're doing for ESY, make it a longer day, make it a number of weeks, and do more than the bare minimum, because the bare minimum isn't getting our numbers anywhere. If we're really, truly going to commit to moving these numbers, we need to put the time into it, and we need to give these kids the chance to get an education. That's all.
So to go off the Vice Chair, there's a lot I totally agree with you with a 12-month program. However, from an educator's perspective, good luck finding the staff to fund, because you wouldn't find many people that would go through their whole summer to educate. I do 6 weeks, 4 weeks, 5 weeks, and that's enough for it, but I totally agree with you, we need to do that. But another problem that we're having with ELs, from my experience, some of them will come in May of 7th grade, and then they'll go into 8th, and they just don't, you're right, the time is not enough, but the problem is, schools can only do so much when families are coming in May, like, we might have a kid, right now, in my grade, we have 9 ELs. I guarantee you by December, we'll have about 18. We'll have double that. And then you have from December, we'll go on break, they'll come back in January, and then you only have that 4 or 5 months to help them. And then they're passed on. And it goes back to my whole point with the middle school and elementary school, where you're passing them, and there's just, and also, as Member Willett will say, the state cut our funding. So how you expect these teachers to have all these programs? Because I would love to have those programs. I would love to have all those nice resources and, you know, have those stipends, because I guarantee you, if those stipends were right, a lot of teachers would volunteer, but some of the stipends that we get are probably $500, and we have to do 5 months. And we'll just do 1 week, or like 1 day, maybe a week to help, but that's not enough for 2-hour programs. So there's a lot of issues, and I'm not saying your ideas, trust me, educators love your ideas that you're bringing to the table. It's what Member Willett said, the state doesn't give the money to the schools to do those programs. So I just want to collaborate that, yeah, we sympathize, we would love that, but fortunately, we don't have that.
I think the commonality of the shared vision there is that sense of urgency that needs to be felt to move the student groups along and to really maximize the time that we have with them. And I think that that's something that is the undercurrent of a lot of these actions here, and we definitely feel that urgency as well.
Just to go off topic a little bit, and this is just something I want to pose to the administration, and I don't know the answer to it, so I'm just posing the question. Do we have, and again, I'm a fiscal conservative, but do we have a full-time, strictly focused on grants, like a grant administrator?
We do not.
Okay, so that's something I think for the budget discussion, because if you have a full-time, totally focused on grants, there's so many competitive grants out there, nonprofit, charitable, federal and state, that we can send a letter to the legislative delegation, and like Member DiZoglio and the mayor and myself and others have said the disconnect at the state, and I think personally it's going to get worse. But if we can explore the option and see if other school districts have a person that their main mission solely, not data collection, not test scores, you know, not academics, but just grant, acquisition. That's something I think we need to start doing, because we're not going to get the resources from the state, unfortunately. But if we have someone that might be a grant administrator, and, you know, you might have something with the charitable group or a nonprofit or a federal or something, and it's very competitive, and you got to do the paperwork. I think Dr. Harris in the past was that person, and I think she was outstanding with the grants. But I think we really need to explore that as a committee. And again, I represent one voice, but there's a disconnect right now with the state. And we'll do is, I think, like towards the end of the year, and I might draft the letter or maybe invite the legislative delegation, and it won't be an adversarial relationship. I don't want that. But we have legitimate concerns as a school district, as a school committee, as elected officials on behalf of our students, that the headwinds that we're experiencing, and we're not getting the resources to it. So like, Member Donovan, I know the mayor, myself, and others, we're like policy wonks, and we absorb articles and we read different things. And I think Lowell might be something that we can explore, but, and I know we have the summer school, the vacation, and other programs, but if we don't have the resources long-term, it's not gonna help us.
Yeah.
So that was just something I wanted to just say out there, maybe down as we're going through fiscal year '26 budget review, but just something that we really need to have somebody there that's on a full-time basis doing grant acquisition.
I have very strong opinions about that and have voiced that for the 13 years I've been doing this work, because I started as assistant superintendent with a full-time grant administrator. And as the assistant superintendent, I was the one who ended up doing all of the narrative and the writing and so the grant writer was completely separated from the day-to-day work that we were doing in the schools with the principals, knowing what our improvement plans were. It became more of a challenge to everything that the grant writer had always came on my plate to say, is this something you want? Is this something we want? And then it was, can you write the narrative? I'm not sure how it fits. Well, I'm doing all the work anyway. So I have a real personal but professional feelings about that. And I also know that in the role of assistant superintendent, there are also other people we rely on in this district. John Crocker's one of them, right? Excellent grant writers, federal and state. Like, we rely on the people who are in the work, aligning to the work that we're doing, to find that and make sure the narrative aligns to what the grant is offering, what we're offering. Dr. Golubsky does the same thing. We have some in technology. Nancy Lopez is actually becoming very, very skilled at finding the federal grants that could possibly fit our need, right? We have all those access. So I do have opinions about that. When I'm cutting other management positions or other teachers, that is definitely, for me, not going to be something I would recommend as a priority. Totally get the why behind your saying that, and it's been asked of me for the 13 years I've been in central office. Don't we need this? Don't you need it? Don't you want this? We really don't. I don't think that would be a priority need for us, but still recognizing we're definitely getting and scouring every opportunity we can to get the funds, right? So we're getting that through the state. We always get, I mean, the legislators are fantastic sending us the opportunities to see if they match or not. So we are doing all of those pieces as well. So again, I have strong opinions. We can certainly talk about it during the budget season, but with everything else we have lost or could potentially be losing, I think we need to set our priorities and make sure they're aligned. Totally get the reasons why, though. Yeah, appropriate.
It was just a little curveball, and
No,
you know
listen,
what,
I'm very, the
appreciate
mayor was looking at me. He knew I was going to say something.
Yeah.
I've been saying this for years, so did the vice chair, because I've been saying this for a long time. It's hard to separate that work for people who aren't involved in day-to-day in the work and the why and the planning and the meetings with principals. It became very challenging to have that be a full-time job separate from the work that we're doing. It ended up being that a little bit.
Because we're going to have to, like, maximize every dollar, which we do anyways.
I think in this discussion, we've already added a couple million to the budget for next year, so these are all the things that.
Yeah, but what it is, it's in the context of we lost about, lost about $4 or $5 million in anticipated Chapter 70
I know,
monies.
this is
So
what I'm saying.
When
like
we try to do the best we can, then it's.
We are doing the best we can.
Yeah.
I mean, to say that I don't have staff that are doing 15 million things right now to try to cover every department for whether it's loss or just more, we are continuing to ask people to do more, and it's hard. It was hard, it always has been hard. I'm lucky with the people that I'm surrounded with are willing to give 150% every day to get things done, but, we hear all of you. I think, Vice Chair Keegan, I don't disagree with you. We would love to, but that you say, I mean, I was trying to not look at the business. Mr. Goslin during that, but, because it is hard. That's a huge financial risk for a district to do that, but what does it mean for us and our kids? And what kind of conversation do we have to have about it? So recognizing all of those and balancing it is really important with this work. But anyway,
I agree.
we
All
digress.
right, Dr. Golofsky, bring us home.
Yeah.
All right, the big finish here. Okay, so plan, or objective number 3, the partnerships with families and students to increase connectivity, engagement, and belonging. So I'm just going to the key actions here. So we talked about identifying kids who are chronically absent. More importantly, I think trending toward chronic absenteeism and taking the actions to support them. And reiterate the connection between school attendance and achievement, Mayor, which I think you mentioned earlier. Make sure that all schools review and revise the home visit protocols and create the home visit teams. Collaborate with stakeholders to launch a multi-phase plan to create the Methuen Public Schools vision of a graduate. The high school right now is in the process, the NEASC accreditation process, which it looks different than it has in years past. So they're wrapping up their self-study, and then the team will come out this fall to actually take a look at what we think, as a result of tearing through all of our documents and survey results, are the 3 areas that we need to work on. And so the high school will work with NEASC to figure out how they're going to work on those aspects, and then NEASC gives some time and we'll be back in a year or 2 to say, okay, what were the results of your work? So whereas before it felt a little bit more like a gotcha, and now it's kind of a collaboration to work on items that we need to address. One of those, which we're pretty sure they'll agree that we need to create, is this vision of a graduate, and that's something that all stakeholders, parents, educators, students, K-12 will have a voice in creating, and this is the portrait of what we are aiming for all our students to be able to do or to be, and that mirrors what we know they need to be successful. So that's going to be a big undertaking. Talking points we've had, but there are new features. And we also want to make sure that we're using it as effectively as possible to communicate student growth and achievement, and that families are accessing talking points in the language of their choice, or else it's not really doing what we intend for it to do. The increase in school day and evening opportunities for families to attend. So those could be grade level offerings to showcase student work, or college planning events at night. I'm starting a comprehensive list of what those offerings are throughout the district. Thought it would be nice to share with you all monthly about things that are coming up, but also to put on the website, in addition to school calendars, so people can scroll through and just see what there is being offered. And then also, something that we haven't necessarily done before is we've tracked how many families and parents have come to events, but we haven't necessarily been committed to tracking who it is who is coming to the events. So a couple administrators suggested that if we offered pre-registration or scanning a QR code when you come in, maybe we'll get a better sense of what it is that parents are looking for in terms of the partnership from the school. And maybe it's not necessarily within the school. Maybe it's also off school grounds in different neighborhoods, or what that might look like. But I think there's some work to do in terms of the information gathering, and who we're appealing to, and in what way. And we're certainly understanding that just because a family may not show up or enter the school, that it doesn't necessarily track that they're not invested or supportive in their students' education, but we do want to have those communications with them. Next, the Youth Participatory Action Research. This is a grant that I applied for, and we were awarded. And I'm excited about this because it allows for every upper school and the high school to create this club or sorts that's supported by a DESE vendor, where students identify an issue impacting academic, social, or well-being. And then they become change agents themselves as they start to take action. So in some ways, similar to the civics project, but different at the same time. And so they're gonna, the vendor is going to help us support how do you advertise to the upper school students? How do you attract interest? What do you do with this cohort? And there's funding for an advisor in each of the schools as well. And then also there's another grant we were awarded, and that's supporting immigrant youth through clubs and activities. And I hear that a lot from the ELE teachers, that the newcomers especially would love to participate in a group where they feel like they're supported. This particular grant helps them navigate the school system, and not just students, but also families. So we're talking about disparities and outcomes and opportunities. This is huge for that. And it specifically speaks to students in high school. So it would involve counselors and teachers as advisors, bringing our English learners and particularly newcomer immigrant youth to college campuses, community college campuses, work sites, CTE programming, like letting them know what pathways are available to them and how they can access it. And that's also, there's funding available to start those clubs in the middle schools as well. So do they know what advanced math is? Do they know how to access it? How can we help with interventions in helping not only the student but the families? And then we have the Mental Health Parent and Student Advisory Council. We would like to expand that to have more parent involvement and student involvement from various grade levels, 5 through 12. So I think Mr. Crocker feels as though he has a strong core, but looking to build out and hear more voices. And then he also is interested in supporting an advocacy and awareness building action plan to reduce any stigmas that may be associated with reducing, with accessing mental health services, and to be a little bit unique in the approach about communicating about the various services we offer and outlets. So whether that's posting on social media, starting some social media channels, working with our media team to create videos, meeting students where they are, instead of maybe asking them to access a website and navigate through several steps to get there. We talk about the BRIGHT model that's at the CGS this year, and evaluating that model and deciding if that's something that's worthwhile and putting in the other schools as well. And then I have the survey on culture and climate that we would like to share with students and families and work on making improvements as needed and executing those plans. And that's a multi-year process as well. So you'll see that for some of these items, in terms of our progress measures, we first have to establish what the baseline is before we get into thinking about where we need to end up. We don't want to undershoot or overshoot. And then a big measure, as Desi suggested, would be that chronic absenteeism rate as well. Okay. Thank you.
So I'm going to start, if you don't mind, and just say, I really like what you guys have done here. I'm a little concerned, only in the number of key actions that you've kind of listed. So on board with the objectives, love, I reflect back to what Member Shabilia said. So to me, if it's not measurable, I'm not really sure why we should be talking about it, but I would just encourage you guys to go back and take a look and maybe narrow down some of the key actions. There's a lot there. And I'm talking, we all want to get all of this done, right? But there's a lot there. There's just so much to me, right? And so on board with the objectives, like the key actions. One concern is there might be too many for you to monitor and measure. And I don't know how the rest of the committee feels. I'll wait and hear them out. But, to me, I think, you're taking an important stride forward. I love the incremental goal plateauing. We could talk about that, but that's my 2 cents, so I appreciate you taking the time to go through it.
Thank you.
Member DiZoglio.
Thank you. Just going off of that, like I said, I was listening and I'm like, wow, these are great ideas, but I do think you're shooting for a lot for a short amount of time. And if you did accomplish a lot of them, that's great. We just add on to those key actions. But like I always say, like you should do 2, 3 and see how it goes. And if you accomplish these other objectives, great. We could, trust me, we're not going to sit here and say, well, you did those key, you picked those 3, but you accomplished these 3, but those are not the key ones, so we're going to hold that against you. We're not going to do that. I do, however, I do love the even opportunities that goes off of our subcommittee. Member Maxwell and we hit these ideas of cultural events, bringing in different groups coming in to explore their cultures and have that like a family event. I would love to see those. So when I saw that, I was like, I'm glad we're having that key action based off of the conversations we had at our meetings. But like I said, yeah, like the mayor said, I feel like we're, again, just doing too much at a little amount of time. So I will agree with the mayor on that one. Thank you.
We had more, too. It took us, this is a challenging exercise, and what is going to be the most important actions on the outcomes, right? Like, we're focused on the outcomes. We believe a whole set of actions are going to give us those outcomes, right? So our eye is on the prize, no matter what we do. And so we did. We had a whole bunch, and we pared it down, and the leadership team helped us, but also keeping in mind, this is over 3 years, too, right? So some of these things are going to be in year 1, and we're going to update you, right? And so we recognize that, and we may take that into consideration tonight and see, but, this is where we landed with sort of a consistency and what we think is going to be the biggest bang for our buck over the course of 3 years to see this movement. And again, I think the one thing that I've appreciated about this, and we really have lived it in this district, is previous in my time here, the improvement plans were a document and not necessarily living, breathing, talking, working through. This is what we have lived by the last strategy plan in everything we do, right? It's on every document. It's every staff member can tell you what our priorities are. It's part of our improvement plan, our professional development planning. So it's woven into all of our work. This is the same way, right? So we're going to be very transparent coming back to you saying, we got these 2 key actions way wrong, like way off, right? So that when we look at where we ended year 1 and say, we actually have these 2 priorities that surface that are going to actually yield a greater outcome than these 2. So I think I've appreciated that part of this process the last 3 years, and we've engaged in that. That we're not changing what our goals are and the outcome, but how we get there, we might have to tweak that along the way. And I see this as the same process.
Madam Vice Chair?
So, appreciate it.
Thank you. First, I have a comment on the objective 3. I'm a little bit concerned with the tracking of the percentage of anxiety, depression, and post-traumatic stress, because in order to get those numbers to go down, one, we're expecting that we're actually going to be mental health providers, and I know that we do a lot, but that's a little bit of a concern to me. But I'll just take an example of post-traumatic stress. So we have a student who has PTSD, and we help that student get a little bit better so the number goes down. We're not preventing traumatic events from happening to another student. And so that other student comes up and that number goes back up again. And so we're not tracking the same students throughout. And so that number is so fluctuating, it's not really a meaningful number. And so I'm afraid that that's the case with all of the mental health numbers, that as we help students who have anxiety, we've got new kids popping up. And so those numbers are going up. And so this number to say we're going down would indicate that we're actually preventing something from happening to begin with. And I don't think that we have that sort of control. And so I want to just rethink those numbers a little bit and how we present them and how we track them, because we're not tracking student for student, we're tracking
Just
a big,
total.
a total every single time.
Yeah.
And so I'm a little bit concerned about those numbers.
And I appreciate that, because you had this conversation with me to bring it up tonight, that I think we do need to look at those a little deeper to be able to report out the kids that we know. It's kind of like the chronic absenteeism, right? Here are
Yes.
the kids who I started with that I know have participated in the survey, have indicators, high, right level. Where do they start in September and go to? So I think those are definitely conversations that Dr. Golofsky and I have had after our conversation that we want to have with Mr. Crocker, because I think those tell two different stories. So I
Right.
totally agree with you. But that's going to be the 2-year process, right? Follow the kids who indicated and follow them for the second year to see what the process was, right? And where they ended that second year, and did we see that incremental improvement in their well-being?
Yes,
Yeah,
and
totally.
once we have this well-oiled machine, that we have a kid who has a traumatic event happen in their life that we had no control over,
Right.
comes into our machine, and as they go through, we see the progress happening for that student. I think that's an important indicator, that we have a system that's working,
Yep.
as opposed to, hey, look, we've made this number go down, but it's an arbitrary number that doesn't actually track anything.
Yeah. Got it. Yep, we're on it. Very good point. Excellent. Excellent.
Thank you. Thank you for
So
listening.
we have, I'm hoping, not that this is voted on, but this is a draft that we want to start preparing with our staff. And obviously for me to prepare my own goals aligned to this, where I'm getting head nods. Are we all in, like, we're going to move forward with this? Yep.
Is the mental health is the mental health, I don't want to say participation, but is that required by the state? Because I feel like there's a lot of,
It's an opt-out always.
well, I'm just saying, I feel like, as a district, I mean, because I feel like we're providing, or we're focused a lot on the mental health, which I think we should be. I'm not saying we shouldn't be. However, like Member Keegan said, we are not medical providers, and for us to be watching and growing and treating and all of the depression and the anxiety, we're not qualified to do that. So I don't know, I just have a lot of, yeah,
I think there's a lot that we are qualified to do, and that's what we've been following for the past 10, I've been involved in this with Mr. Crocker for a good 10 years or so at this point. And it is something that the state actually expects and wants us to
Okay,
do.
that's what I
is
was
mental
asking.
health screeners, and other districts are 100% engaged in this work as well. We just have done it a little bit longer than some other districts.
okay.
Yeah.
And done a better job at it.
Oh, thank you. Well, it has been a part of our conversation easily for 10, 11 years. It did, most people started the work during COVID. That's when the state and the other districts really started to push this. So we already had data previous to COVID, because we started some of this work in different grade levels, and we've expanded since then. But so it's a little different for us. But Member Keegan's point about actually looking at a student, taking the student A and following student A through this process actually will demonstrate the work that our staff is doing and the impact they do have. So while they might not be a licensed outside clinical therapist, school counselors absolutely have an impact on the mental health and the cognitive behavioral therapies that they're doing in school with kids, and that's what we're focused on. So, we can see that a little differently. So definitely worth looking into breaking that section apart a little bit to show, I think, what we just described, I think is great. Awesome. Thank you.
Excuse me, Mayor. We're just about to hit 9 o'clock, so we'd have to make a motion to extend the meeting.
Well, now.
So moved.
Second.
By Member Shabilia, seconded by Member DeZoglio. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. I would say nay, but I won't. All right, we're at 8:58, we can keep going.
Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate that, Martha. Member DeZoglio, you had a question?
Yeah, I have just two things I was asked by constituents to ask. One was a concern about the cell phone policy. Is hoods allowed to be worn in class, because they were concerned that AirPods could be used and they could put the phones away, but I want them to be redressed that AirPods are not allowed to be used, and I'm pretty sure hoods are not allowed to be worn in class.
They can.
They can't.
Hoods and hats are part of our dress code, so they can be worn.
So-
Earbuds cannot be used in
But
class.
so the parents.
Understand.
Yeah, the parents' concern is they could put the phone in the bag, but then listen to music with AirPods in.
But once the teacher asks them to remove their hood to see that, they have to do that.
Okay.
They have to be identifiable and be able to see that the student doesn't have earpods in. They can keep their hood on, but I've done that in I've done that in high school classrooms walking around, so.
College.
Yeah, so,
And the second concern was that parents are having problems of getting on
Infinite Campus?
Yeah, with the sense of they're not getting notifications for their emails, like personal emails, saying like, if like my personal email, I would get a notification that there's a notification on Infinite Campus and they were to log in. Is that?
I think what he's talking
No.
about is the transportation email that went out did not go out to parents. It only went to the Infinite Campus
yeah, that's
inbox.
different.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay,
Sent to
that was
subsequent one.
what,
Can tell you, I scheduled a email on Friday night at 6 o'clock. I got a receipt saying that 1,300 emails went out. I did, however, get a lot of people who said they didn't get it. I don't know if maybe it went to spam. I don't know if there's a glitch in the system. I resent it again this morning at about 11, I want to say, which is really weird because I sent that out the same way I did the one on the 13th, 12th to 13th, the previous one, and everyone got that one. If they don't have it, just have them email MPS Transportation,
Weird.
and we'll get
Okay.
them the information they need. But also, if they just log into Infinite Campus and they go to the Transportation tab, the students' busing is there, the regular
Yeah.
busing is there.
yeah, they
You
were
never got
saying that.
Remember, Keegan?
That's so weird.
Busing?
Yeah.
No,
You get the
none
first
of
one
you
that
got
said
the
I would send
busing?
it,
Yeah,
like, yeah.
You got it?
yeah.
Okay. Well, all right. Didn't get one Friday or got one Friday? Did not. You didn't get either Friday or? I got one, I don't know. Interesting. Okay. Thank you. Yeah, we'll look into that. If there's, I know, we'll look into that for sure. We haven't heard any other concerns about Infinite Campus, so we'll look into that one. Okay,
Member Shabilia.
Couple of things for next agenda.
sure.
Last meeting, you had that handy dandy but also sad list of open positions.
Oh, yeah, that will be, yes.
We can have that, an update on that
Yeah, of
next
course,
time?
yes, September 9th, yeah, I have that as part of the
Is it
reporting.
possible to, I don't recall because I don't have it in front of me clearly, but if it was broken down by school,
It was.
is it also possible to have on there what we're required to have? So for example, like, an open position in my mind is something that you either have or are about to post as a position. But if there are, let's say, for example, you're not posting a second nurse position, but yet we would be, my understanding is we're required to have so many nurses per 500 kids in a building. So if we could just know if there is a requirement, maybe it's not being filled, and I'm sure there's always a reason for all these things happening, but just so we can get an understanding of where we are and what,
Critical versus non-critical?
sure.
Okay.
On the second one, my understanding is there's going to be some new stipends for floating, if I'm stating this correctly. So, for example,
More than that.
again, using the nurses as an example, if they're going to be floating from building to building or if they're going to be alone for a day, I just want to be able to track and understand what fiscal impact that's going to have versus hiring someone. So if we could see that, I don't know, monthly, quarterly, whatever you're doing it on, I'm sure it's going to be a line item in Munis, so it should just be a click, hopefully a click away. And then I've gotten a lot of questions and comments over lunch, which I know is everybody's second favorite thing behind supplies. So if we could have that conversation, I know that the food service director in the past has offered us stuff, tours, lunch pop-ins, samples, and all that good stuff. I'd like to get, I don't know if it's the committee or a subcommittee, whatever it has to be, to take advantage of that and start exploring that in a more productive way than just everyone complaining about it.
Sure. Do you want him to be present, or you just want to
I am going to defer that to you.
have him communicate with the group? Okay,
That's it for me.
okay.
Member Willett?
Just to piggyback on membershipia, it was an inundation of complaints about the food service. I've always been a strong advocate of surveys, and it has to be a model survey out there for that school lunch breakfast industry of having a survey sent out to parents. And I want a full-blown, you take home the survey, you have the 2 weeks, and I want not a small sample, I want to have as many parents and the students, if they want to participate as well, to do a survey of the food service. We have a surplus in the account. I don't want to jump to conclusions, but there is an underbelly of concern from parents that percolates to the surface online, and I think it's something as a committee we have to really analyze. But I don't want to jump to conclusions, but there has to be a survey vehicle sent home to the parents this time around. Similar to what we're doing for transportation. I hate to say it would have smoked this fire, but there's definitely something going on here. And I want to get some responses back from the parents and the students. Thank you.
There clearly will be desire for more bologna and cheese. That's what I see, yeah. So, all right, anything else? Oh, sorry. Oh, Member Donovan, sorry, my apologies.
A gentle reminder, the building committee,
Say it again?
we need to set a date for the building committee. And I believe that's Mr. DiZoglio, Mr. Shabilia, and myself. Okay, so if we could work on that, because time is a-wasting. You're going to say something?
I was going to make a suggestion, and just to think about it, because we have a lot of subcommittees right now, and it's hard if we are because sometimes I need to be there, sometimes I don't. Sometimes Ian and I both need to be there, sometimes we don't. Sometimes you might need Gina Bozak there, sometimes you might need Lisa. It just depends on who you might need from the district there. If I reach out to each of the subcommittees and come up with a sort of a regular schedule of posting. I know in the past, when we had the residency subcommittee, we always knew that we were going to meet like at 5 o'clock before the business meeting. And we just assigned that. And when we didn't need it, we didn't meet and post it. But we all knew 5 o'clock before the business meeting is when the residency subcommittee was going to meet. So, and then we just meet here, and then we roll into the regular meeting. So
Sound
maybe
fair?
if we could come up with something like that with the policy subcommittee or the transportation, because we're kind of popping now when we need to, and having some consistency would be helpful. And there are a few, and I don't want to lose sight of because I think we have 4 subcommittees right now. Is that right? Transportation,
Yep.
building, policy, and
Bologna sandwich.
The audit.
maybe it's
The
those
audit.
3.
The audit. The audit.
I'm not involved in that, though. I
Okay.
don't. No, Yeah, that's done. So maybe it's 3. So if we can come up with a system of scheduling those, I think that would be beneficial to all of our calendars in time.
That's a great
To
idea.
have it before the meetings we currently have scheduled, right? And we just kind of rotate it if that works for folks. But I'll communicate with each of the subcommittees if that works.
Okay.
But thank you for that. If
And the
we're
other,
knee-deep in trying to get some building stuff done still with the lease, so just so you're aware.
okay. And the last thing, I would think it would be beneficial to have our attorneys come to a meeting and just do a mini review for our roles and responsibilities as school committee members. And my inspiration for this came from what the Andover School Committee did as they were getting into their negotiations. Just so we have a cohesive approach, we all know what our responsibilities are, and I just think it would be a great idea. I think a few years ago, perhaps, the lawyers came in and did like a refresher course.
So we did. Mike Macaro and Sarah Spadafor, and I'm not sure how many of you know Sarah, but she has worked with us over the years. I believe they came in during the 17-18 school year maybe, or might have been
Yeah,
my
I think
first, I don't remember if it was my first year,
remember
18-19. They came in and just did it during a public session, a workshop, and is that something the committee would like me to look into again with them? So they probably already have an agenda for that they did, they can kind of refresh that? Okay.
Quick in response to that. So I plan on bringing that policy forward of that. The problem is I've been trying to get a hold of our rep at MASC to come in, and she's just been busy, but she's going to come in and explain the free training that MASC provides.
Right.
I have the list. The superintendent already has the policy on her desk. I just want to make sure she's here to explain how that program works. So I'm collaborating with her, and hopefully I can get her into the September meeting.
If I may, I think that's a great idea, and I fully support it. I'm just thinking in terms of
Getting us ready.
as we get ready to
Yep.
move forward.
Because I think what MASC will support is they have very specific topics as well that they can bring to us or that you can go to on certain issues that expand, right? If we have Attorney Macaro and Spadafor come in, it's sort of just a general where we are as a body. Is that what I'm seeing
Yeah.
a little bit? So both actually
what
will
I
play a really important role.
You
All
wanna
right,
bring
I'll
it?
be happy to look
Okay.
at that and see if I can get something scheduled with them and
Thank you.
what they're, great, okay.
And good luck tomorrow and
Anything else?
Wednesday.
Okay, with no further business to discuss, may I have a motion and a second
So-
to adjourn this workshop business session of the Methuen School Committee on August 26, 2024?
So moved.
Second.
Moved by member Zaga, seconded by member Shabilia. Roll call, please, Madam Secretary.
Brian DiZoglio?
Yes.
Mary Beth Donovan?
Yes.
Lori Keegan?
Yes.
Kristen Maxwell?
Yes.
Daniel Shabilia?
Yes.
Kenneth Willett?
Yes.
Mayor Neil Perry?
Yes, thank you all. With that, the meeting is adjourned at 9:11 PM.
Good night, Methuen.